Hello and welcome back to Death and Taxes, your weekly live stream podcast from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I am one half of your hosting duo, John Humphreys, and I am joined, as always, by Gene Tunny. Gene, how you doing?
I'm going well, John. How about yourself?
Top of the world, another beautiful day in paradise up here.
Absolutely.
No, really well. I mean, notwithstanding what's going on in the world is, crumbling around me, but my little family unit is coping well, all things considered. Quite a bit to get through today. We've got a guest. We've got a guest coming up. We'll introduce soon Tom Switzer. He's returning, hopefully with better internet this time round. We are going to be talking about the economic news of the day, of course, have a bit of a look at the upcoming budget. Going to look into a bit of Matt Canavan's speech that he gave at the National Press Club and his agenda for a different economic direction for the country. And then on politics, One Nation it continues their rise in the lead up to the Victorian state election. And of course, the big news, saving the big one for the end, the Iran war is taking lots of dramatic twists and turns, going from everyone considering the possibility of nuclear war one day to a peace deal the next, to it falling apart to who knows what. We're going to unpack that later in the show. So that's what we've got coming up. Before we get to that, if I could ask you, dear viewer, wherever you're watching this, could you please give it a like, give it a share, boost it around the algorithm. It helps the algorithm to know that this is what people need to see. This is being live streamed on YouTube, on X, and on Facebook. You can see all the detail. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, you can see all the links below in the write-up. Please go around to all those other social media sites and give us a like and a follow on all those places. It really does help us out. And also check out Taxpayers Alliance, taxpayers.org.au, and Oz Taxpayers, austaxpayers.substack.com. That's where you can find our home on the internet. Go there, follow us there. It really does help us out. So with that all done and out of the way, I will bring on Tom Switzer. So Tom, how you doing?
G'day, guys. Great to see you both.
Yeah, good to see you, Tom.
I should have said, I didn't know how to order this, bring you up first or to intro you first, but I should have said, of course, Tom, if you haven't seen it yet, people listening at home, Tom is now host of the Switzerland podcast, which is one of the best new geopolitical, really, podcasts floating around the Australian space. It is really worth your while going and checking it out. It is on the YouTubes. I think you can find it on Substack. I don't know if you've got it anywhere else, Tom. Where else are you hiding your work?
Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Substack. Yeah.
All right, Apple Podcast. We're not on that. Maybe we should do something about that, Gene. And of course, Tom, you were at the. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it the AFR, the SPECI, the Australian, the Centre for Independent Studies? You've been just floating around all of the places where right-thinking people talk about ideas now for a couple of decades. Did I get any of those wrong?
No, they're all right. I also am proud of the fact that I worked at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, which is a well-known neoconservative public policy think tank. And I had 3 years there in the 1990s. And I also worked at the London-based Spectator. I was their Australian editor for about 4 to 5 years, from roughly 2009 to 2014. And that was a lot of fun as well.
So did you get kicked out of the AEI for being insufficiently pro-war?
Well, in those days, I was more interested in domestic politics and domestic policy. This was the time of Newt Gingrich's revolution in 1994, when the Republicans won both the House of Representatives and the Senate for the first time in generations. And, it was a very exciting time to be in Washington, reducing the size and the scope of the government. So I was very much part of that momentum, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. That would have been a great period, Tom, because that was one of the last periods of really bipartisan work on the budget, getting the budget back under control. Was that right? With Gingrich, with Contract for America, and then Clinton. I mean, Clinton was very much the third way. He was open to fixing the budget and work with Gingrich to get that under control.
It's interesting, Gene, because at the time in 95, 96, 97, Washington was a very acrimonious environment. It was a lot of political gridlock, if you like. But in retrospect, Newt Gingrich, who was leading the Republican House, Republican, and Bill Clinton, who was the Democrat president, had been re-elected in 1996, they managed to get together and pass some pretty sound bipartisan policy. So from a historical perspective, it was a good relationship. And we haven't really had anything like it in Washington in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
I've actually got cartoons at home that I framed of Gingrich and Clinton because I admired what they did at the time.
Yeah.
That's how much of a political dog I am.
You're also aging yourself there. I mean, it does seem like a political lifetime ago. That sort of those sort of interactions between I guess a Keating and Howard type. Not that those two are particularly friendly to each other, but I mean they coordinated on policy to some degree. In a way
that's right. In that period from 1983 to 1996, there was a broad bipartisan consensus. Bob Hawke, Paul Keating in power, but also John Howard in opposition, to pass a lot of sound market-oriented policy that ultimately made Australia a more competitive and a more prosperous place.
I've said this before that I think Howard gets a lot of credit for the things he did while he was in government. I don't like a lot of the things he did while in government, but I think the truly great thing he did in the public sphere in Australia was his behaviour as opposition leader. When Hawke and Keating were putting forward ideas that weren't overly popular but were necessary, the easy political move for an opposition would be to complain about them and throw mud. But instead, Howard decided, no, those were the right policies. Even though they're unpopular, I'm going to back them in so that they can pass, give up the political opportunity to score points for the greater good of the country. I think that is an admirable, probably in my opinion, the most admirable thing he did in his public life.
Well, John, there's an outstanding ABC documentary that went to air in 1994 to mark the 50th anniversary of the birth of the Liberal Party. And I think it's in the 4th episode. There are 5 episodes. In the 4th episode, about the 1980s, Andrew Peacock, who had been the opposition leader, is actually telling the ABC interviewer that he felt that his shadow treasurer, John Howard, was getting too close to Paul Keating.
Right.
By the way, I should have said, I've been putting up a few of the comments. We do take your comments and questions as we go. We take some of them as we go. We save many of them for the end. If we have time at the end of the show, we try to get through them. We'll see how we go. So please feel free to write in any comments you have as you go. And I should, a preemptive warning, last time we had Tom on the show, the internet was not our friend. I believe ASIO was listening in, and when we said the wrong thing, they just occasionally pulled the plug. And so we are hoping this works better this time around, but I guess being forewarned is, I can't remember the rest of that saying. But anyway, now you have been warned. With that out of the way, the first piece of substantive news we normally get to is when I throw to Gene by saying that normal people don't follow economics all week. You, dear listener, are probably normal, or at least more normal than us. That's fine. You don't have to follow economics all week, because once a week you can come here and for 5 or 10 minutes, listen to Gene, and he will catch you up on everything you needed to know. With that said, Gene, take it away.
Okay, thanks, John. I think the expression is it forewarned is forearmed? I think you might have been reaching for that one there.
That is the one. Thank you. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so look, I mean, the last few days have been a bit of a roller coaster. I mean, earlier in the week, we had the president threatening to rain down death and destruction on Iran, and there was talk about ending a civilization. There was speculation about, not that he said it explicitly, but people were reading into that a nuclear strike, and I mean, that was terrifying. People around the world, and having impacts on markets, and then all of a sudden, yesterday we have news of a ceasefire, which subsequently we discovered hasn't really lasted more than half a day, because Lebanon wasn't included in it. But nonetheless, we had a recovery, a drop in the oil price back to under 100. And we've had some bounce back today on the news that the ceasefire may not be what was originally envisaged. However, I think last I looked, it was up about 3% to around 97 US a barrel. So this is the Brent crude oil price. So we haven't had the market spring back to where it was, the high price we had earlier in the week. So it looks like the market seems to be thinking, well, okay, we're out of the danger zone. Trump's not going to launch he's not going to rain the fire and fury down upon Iran after all. So maybe we can relax a bit. Who knows? I mean, we're still on this roller coaster, so who can really tell? I mean, this is one of the reasons we've got Tom, who's a noted geopolitical expert, on tonight to help us figure out what might be going on. So what we had the other day when we had the news about the ceasefire, we had the ASX really pick up on at the opening, and again, it sort of remained sort of stable since then. So even though we've got a ceasefire that may not actually be a ceasefire, the market seems fairly relaxed about it all, which again is maybe too much complacency there, but we shall see. Okay, the other thing I've been following, which I've found fascinating, is the news around this 5% deposit scheme that the federal government brought in October last year, whereby they're essentially guaranteeing the mortgages of first home buyers if they put down 5% deposit. And so that means they don't have to get the expensive lender's mortgage insurance. And we've had 6 months of the scheme already. And Cotality, the real estate data people, they put out some great information, some great new data today showing just how much of a difference this has made to the value of properties, the market where you've got properties that are under the property price caps in different cities. So that might be $1 million in Brisbane or 1.5 in Sydney. And what you see is that those properties where the people can buy them under the scheme, the 5% deposit scheme, their prices are surging ahead of those that are outside the cap. So we've got about 6 to 7% growth, and this is over 6 months, in properties that are under the cap versus 3 to 4 where they're over the cap. So we see a big impact of that scheme. And so this goes to this issue of, was this really the best thing to do in a market where you've got a supply constraint to add to the demand for housing? And it could be actually perverse for a lot of first home buyers because they all sort of rush into the market at once, pushing up the prices, and they end up with all of this additional debt. And there's going to be some that miss out because of the high prices. So it's not really great policy from the federal government, that one. I think most economists agree. And on the supply issue, I mean, there's some pickup there. We are seeing a pickup of dwelling commencements, but they're still under. So I think in the last quarter of last year, so December quarter, October to December, we had around 54,000. We need approximately 60,000 per quarter. So we need 240,000 every year consistently to get to that 1.2 million target over 5 years. Unfortunately, we're not going to hit that because we've been really slack over the last year or so in terms of housing construction as a nation. There's just not enough going on. And so we are going to miss that target. And that raises the question about housing costs. If we can't build this many houses, why do we have such high population growth? Why have we got this high rate of immigration? So that's one of the big issues that we've been consistently covering here on the live stream. So John, Tom, that's enough from me for now. So if you've got any thoughts or questions on any of that, please jump in.
I got one quick comment that I'm just going to throw to both of you and see how it bounces. We had Cam on the show last week, Dr. Cam Murray, who's one of Australia's more interesting property economists. I don't know if we got the chance to really unpack with him, but he likes to make this point, and it's a shame that I'm making it on his behalf, but bear with me. Australia now has more houses per person than we have ever had in the history of Australia. So I'll just repeat that, because that's not what most people are going to expect. We have now more houses per people than we've ever had in the history of Australia. And yet the conversation always comes back to, oh dear, we've got a housing shortage. So I'm just going to put that one out there and see how that bounces off either of you two. But do you have a response to that, Gene? And then I'll come to Tom.
Well, because 50 or 60 or 70 years ago, we had, what was it, 3.5 people per house. Like, we had bigger families, whereas now we have 2.5 people on average. So, that's part of the reason we do need more houses. But look, I mean, Cam might be right statistically, but I think we all recognise there's a housing affordability challenge. We all recognise just how tough it is for people out there. And we have this extraordinary and increase in homeless people rough sleeping or living in cars, right? I mean, that is, it's a huge economic and a huge social failure. And I mean, that just speaks to the fact that we just don't have enough supply for the demand that we've got at the moment. And I think it means that we really should be looking at those immigration policy settings that we've got.
Yeah, I think the number of people is the issue. But all right, Tom?
Oh, I was just going to say, Cam Murray is arguably one of Australia's leading economists in the property space. But the counter argument is put forward by the likes of Peter Chillip from the Centre for Independent Studies. And he argues that the problem is overwhelmingly a supply side problem. So the logical thing to do would be to build more, create more supply, so that the market finds a way of reducing the prices. The problem is that I think the zeitgeist throughout much of the country is more with Cameron Murray than it is with Peter Chillip. I think if you go all around Sydney, local councils, there's a broad support for opposing the building of property and rental markets. And people speak on these issues and they vote overwhelmingly at these local councils against more supply. So this is the challenge, I think, facing the reformers who want to boost supply. They've sort of met the backlash of public opinion. And I don't see that changing anytime soon, because, a lot of the critics will say that, yes, you can possibly reduce housing prices by creating more supply, but in the process, it's going to be a lot of congestion, a lot more congestion in already busy cities, and a lot of noise. And that's going to create a lot of problems for transport. So I think, unfortunately, the likes of Peter Chillip and the reformers have their backs against the wall, and Cameron Murray, I think, reflects the broad cross-section of a lot of concerned Australians. The question now is, if we don't build more supply, how then do we reduce housing prices rapidly? I'm not sure what the answer is. Cutting immigration? I mean, that creates a lot of other economic problems, doesn't it?
Well, that's a topic that comes up on this show nearly every week. I think it's fair to say, Gene, jump in, tell me where I'm wrong on this, but I think Gene and I are both on a unity ticket where we have the radical revolutionary economic opinion that if you wanted to bring the price down, you would both change the supply and the demand. Mm-hmm. So if you decrease the demand and increase the supply, both would help to put the price down. But sorry, Gene, what were you going to say on that?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, Tom, last week, John, Cam and I chatted about what's happened with Canada. And Canada is a country which has really turned immigration and population growth around. Well, I think they've had a negative quarter of population growth, right? So, and this is helping improve their housing affordability situation. Yeah. So I think Canada is an example. And this is under a Liberal Prime Minister, right? This is under Mark Carney that this is happening. So, Carney's, he's probably you probably can't really compare Elbow to Carney. I mean, Carney's fairly exceptional, but it just shows you what you can do if you've got.
And sorry, is in the Canadian experience, Gene, are the big cities like Montreal and Vancouver increasing supply dramatically?
We didn't bring
Possibly.
our
Not
own research
we'd-
to the
yeah,
conversation. We were just taking what Cam told us. Look, the other thing to
Yes.
note, which Cam pointed out, which is worth adding to this, one of the contributing factors in Canada is that they also have a shrinking economy, which may encourage people to leave the country and may mean people can't afford to spend as much on housing. So that may be part of the puzzle. So that's not necessarily something we want to emulate. Look, a couple of quick comments on what you were saying, Tom. So increasing supply clearly would help with house prices. The perennial question is how you do it. I throw out one quick idea on that'll seem radical to start with, but I think is perfectly achievable. Abolish local councils. The only thing they really do is build local parks and stop you building houses. Now, someone else can build the parks. It must be humanly within our capacity to have some state bureaucrat build a park. There's just swings and grass. We can do that. I believe in us. And then the other thing they do is stop development. So you get rid of them, then that might be part of the, I would then replace them with body corporates at a localized level. So you still have some sort of community governance, but it would be run quite differently. But that's one idea for
John,
their radical
for someone who describes themselves as a libertarian, you don't really believe in decentralization, do you?
Oh, decentralized to the body corporates. That's anarchy, Tom.
I mean, decentralized power so the local councils have a say.
But local councils are just a bureaucratic arm of state government. So that's the thing people need to realize. I would like to see a hell of a lot more state governments. The idea of giving power to regional councils isn't real devolution because the state government controls all the power. If you split the country up into 30 different states, that would be real devolution of power, and that I support.
Yeah. Bob Hawke, before he became Prime Minister, gave the ABC Boyer lectures in the early 1980s, I think. Yeah. One of his lectures was saying how overgoverned Australia is, federal, state and local. And at the time, the population would have been less than 15 million. And now, you still have that same trio, the federal, states and local councils. And we're still a relatively small country, given our landmass. We are an overgoverned country.
Yeah.
I think it is a bit misleading because the local councils, I think I'm correct in how I describe it. And once you see it that way, it changes the way you see it. It's a bureaucratic arm of the state government. It's just one that the state government then struggles to keep in check and makes a bunch of stupid decisions that no one can fix. So just take away that stupid bureaucratic arm of the state government. If you want to decentralize power, do it by creating new states, or even better, decentralizing power to body corporates, which is a private governance structure, which, of course, radical libertarians would talk about.
And, John, something just occurred to me. I know we're going to chat later potentially about Matt Canavan's speech. I mean, one of Matt's ideas is that we promote those regional cities, and that's going to take the pressure off the infrastructure and housing availability in the bigger cities. So that's an idea too, isn't it? And you could support that by having more states. If we had a state of North Queensland, and you can make Townsville a capital of North Queensland and encourage the development there, or a state of Capricornia, Rockhampton is the capital, etc. You can see how that can help relieve the pressure in SEQ and Sydney, etc.
Oh, I pitched that exact thing on a live stream to Matt Canavan before, and he was very positively inclined towards it. It was already the lines along which he was thinking. And one of the ideas is you have more states, you have more state capitals, you have more ability to create more regional centers outside the Big Five. So I think there's some legs in that. I don't know to what degree becoming the leader of a major party means he has to change the sort of topics he talks about or how he talks about them. We will hopefully find out in the coming weeks because he has agreed to come on this show at Substage once he can free himself from the Farah by-election commitments. But that would be a good thing to put to him. Can I just add one more thing on the housing issue? Too many people coming in is going to be putting upward pressure on house prices. So that's one line of, once you recognize that's a causal part of the problem, you can think of a solution, maybe, fewer student visas. Or make them non-permanent. There's a radical idea. The other idea is, not enough supply is also going to be putting upward pressure on the housing prices. So one solution would be increasing supply. All right, that's pretty conventional. But the reason I wanted to point out Cam's insight before, that we have more houses per people than ever in our history, is it makes us think of an extra variable, and that variable is number of people per household. And once we recognize that the shrinking number of people per household is a large causal factor in housing shortages and therefore probably contributing to housing price growth, we can ask ourselves, is it actually a good thing that we've got an ever shrinking number of people per household? Maybe it is, but I don't know if anyone's really asked this question yet. I mean, is this an unexpected extra negative consequence from increased divorce rates? Right?
Well,
more families falling apart. Is more families falling apart actually putting like upward pressure on house prices? Is this a consequence of people always moving away from the cities that they grew up in? And so this sort of decreased loyalty to your local area, is that actually creating a situation where no one ever lives with their grandparents anymore? And therefore, number of people in a household keep declining. Like I don't know the answers to these questions, but it seems to me like an obvious part of the puzzle. If Cam's insight is true, then the shrinking number of people per household is a big part of this story, and no one really seems to talk about it in relation to house prices.
Well, John, it is part of the story, but that's not what's causing the housing affordability crisis that we've seen since the pandemic, right? I mean, like say, okay, so housing was, you could argue it was in Australia, it's been expensive for a long time relative to other parts of the world, but the really acute part of the crisis, or the crisis we're in now, the big ramp up since the pandemic, that can't be due to that factor. I mean, maybe to an extent there was a decline in the household occupancy ratio, but the big driver has been the huge increase in population, hasn't it? And the fact supply hasn't kept up. I think what you're talking about is over a longer time frame. The challenge we've got now is something that's emerged particularly since the pandemic. So I just think we're talking about something with a completely different time frame. I'm not saying what you're saying isn't valid. I think it is valid. It's correct, but what we're dealing with now is a product of just the huge population surge we had post-COVID.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't doubt that the number of people coming in is the issue. I actually think the post-COVID surge is the wrong place to look at, because the standard rebuttal does have truth that if you average it out, it still just averages out at the same level as pre-COVID. It was just making up for the missing gap. So if we'd kept building all the houses in the meantime, that shouldn't have made a difference. I think that the big change was the step up. We had a step up in immigration that was notable, I think about 15 years ago. That's the change that I really think that we didn't fully appreciate the consequences of at the time. We are living with the consequences now. It's becoming far more dramatic. And I don't see huge evidence that the country has hugely benefited from that step change in policy. But look, I'm not trying to get into a conversation about which one matters more. I think we often say both supply and demand matter. And I guess what I'm saying is, it seems to me there is this big extra third category that gets zero discussion. So even if it matters one dot, it's being underrepresented in the conversation. So I have done my part just then to look. And there's a comment here that was related to it, which I think also might be part of it. Is it linked to delayed marriages and less children?
Yes.
Yeah, could tie back to my old favorite topic of the falling fertility rate as well. So
I think also on the supply question, we have a shortage of workers, construction workers. And the CFMEU have been opponents of more immigration for construction workers, which is kind of ironic. And I think if you had an immigration system where you skewed in favour of more construction workers, that could actually help support the supply side argument. Don't you think?
So not Infinity Arts students at university.
Yeah, I think there's a case for having more immigrants who are going to be working in construction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The other issue there as well is the crowding out of public construction projects, crowding out private construction projects.
Yeah.
There's a limited number of workers and there's a limited number of everything in life, right? The dirty little secret of economic scarcity exists. If there's a limited number of construction workers and they're getting paid $1 bazillion to go and work on buildings for the Brisbane Olympics, or they getting paid a normal amount to go and build a new home, they're all off building Olympic stadiums. And that makes it harder and harder to get them at a reasonable price to build a home. Anyway, that's been a relatively deep dive on the housing one. I mean, Chin, you opened with discussion of the coming nuclear apocalypse, and we managed to dive into a 15-minute conversation on housing prices instead. So that was fairly impressive of us. Look, I do think I wanted to get back to the Iran issue later in the show, so maybe I will take that opportunity to take your previous slides as a comment, and just move on to a few other quick economic issues before we dive into the politics. Feel free to interrupt me if you had something crucial on housing you still wanted to say, but if not, Matt Canavan gave an interesting speech at the National Press Club yesterday, I believe it was. And in it, he outlined his agenda, his vision of a new economic agenda for the country, where he didn't really pull any punches. Jens, firstly, did you get a chance to see it?
Yes.
All right. So, well, I don't know, Gene. I talk a lot in these things. Maybe I'll throw to you. Can you give a summary of what you think the main takeaways of Matt Canavan's speech?
The main takeaway is, Matt's talking about his concept of hyper Australia. I think he's got a good line in terms of saying, well, Australia is the only country that has its own continent. I think that's a very important observation. And he's saying, well, that should mean that we can be much more self-sufficient and self-reliant. So I think that's great. I think okay, if it makes sense, if it's economically sensible or to do that, then I'm fine with that. Or if we have an urgent national security need, that's fine too. Look, I think Matt was very sort of broad. It was painted in broad strokes, the speech, and he's talking about how he'd be open to more intervention, more, using tariffs, etc. So things that, traditionally economists have been loath to, well, we haven't really contemplated them. And I think there are risks. We have to make sure that, there is a legitimate case for any intervention, that there is a legitimate national security reason for it, or that I guess it is about China, isn't it? Let's be realistic. Or if China is actually heavily subsidizing their exports to try to basically undercut our industry and send them out of business, and then therefore we just lose all that capital. We have to scrap it. I think maybe there's a case there for some intervention. But again, look, I want to see the specifics about what Matt has in mind before I comment on it, because there clearly is a risk of bad policy. There clearly is a risk of driving up prices to consumers. I just know myself how much better off I think we all are since the 80s, when we had 56% tariff on motor vehicles. Cars are much cheaper in real terms. Clothing is much cheaper in real terms. Like, I look at what I would have paid for a pair of jeans in the 90s and what that'd be in or late 80s, early 90s, what that'd be in current dollars, $200 to $300 for a pair of Levi's or something. And you just wonder, you just realize how much better off we are now because we made those policy changes. So I don't want to go back to that. And Matt's not proposing that at the moment. I want to see the specifics. What I liked about his talk was he was talking about, I like this idea of hyper Australia. I think that's good messaging, that we've got our own continent. And I like the idea of decentralization, of promoting regional towns, which he's going on about. So they're my main takeaways from it, John.
Yeah, look, the other thing he stressed a lot, like over the last couple of years and in that speech as well, is the end of the net zero obsession and dining in on the fact that we have abundant resources, energy resources. We've got uranium.
Did he criticize Milton Friedman?
Yes.
Yeah, he did. So an interesting thing that's come out of, I noticed this little thing that Matt Canavan gave a speech. A lot of it was quite decent and made a lot of sense. And then he got this gratuitous little kick in against Milton Friedman, I assume for political positioning. But yes, he did. I noticed that Hastie did the same thing. Like when you scratch the surface, Hastie's ideas, they're not fully rounded out, so we don't really know what the details are. But a lot of them give you something to work with, right? You could start a conversation there. There's potentially somewhere to go. But he always has to include a gratuitous kick against Hayek. And I just thought it was interesting that they picked different free market economists to pick on. Right? Hastie picks on Hayek and Canavan picks on Friedman.
Yeah, but what's clearly happening here is that both Matt Canavan and Andrew Hastie, whom I like immensely, by the way, both of them, they are reflecting this global resurgence of populist right-wing movements like Trump in the United States, Nigel Farage and Reform in Britain, Le Pen in France, the AfD in Germany, all across the European continent. You're seeing the centre-right parties bleeding votes to right-wing alternatives, and they're losing them on issues like woke, net zero, cultural issues, but they're bleeding them also on economics. And many of these political movements don't champion the old-time religion of free market economics. They're not classical liberals. They're not people like us. They reflect more interventionist economic public policies. And Canavan and Hastie represent that genre, if you like. And I think that for the foreseeable future, politically speaking, I don't think economically speaking, but politically speaking, they're on a political winner.
Yeah, it does seem like it's the zeitgeist of the day. I got to say, I mean, it makes sense to lean into that as the political zeitgeist. I don't know Andrew Hastie as well as I know Matt Canavan, but Matt Canavan is a fairly bright economist, right? And he has a far more nuanced take. I mean, I think he said in his speech that he was open to having more tariffs in the country. And then he said he disagrees with Trump that tariff is a beautiful word. It's just a word. It can be useful sometimes and it's inappropriate sometimes. And the truth is we already have interventionism in the country through anti-dumping measures and subsidies, but they are a very inefficient way to provide that sort of protectionism, and some sort of sensible tariff structure could be a more efficient. I mean, all of that is a pretty sensible economist's approach to policy behind a populist facade. So I'm cautiously hopeful that he might not go full Trump.
And also, I will say this for both of them: what distinguishes them from other classical liberals and mainstream liberal politicians and even National Party people is energy security. They're big on energy security, which of course has become a big issue with the Iran war. And the other point too is both of them have made very sound, sensible criticisms of Donald Trump's decision and Israel's decision to wage war on Iran. Whereas I think most mainstream liberal voters would be more sympathetic to the idea of taking down the Islamic Republic. Both of them have recognized the costs and the consequences of doing so. And I actually think that represents a pretty sound judgment on their part.
Yes, I must admit that is also another reason I find myself quite predisposed towards the Matt Canavan wing of current politics. The fact that he is more of a foreign policy realist, as I would see it, makes me willing to give him a lot of benefit of the doubt in other areas.
Oh, Andrew Hastie as well, John. Andrew Hastie too.
Yeah, I just don't know him as well. So, I mean, I know Matt. I know he's a bright guy. I know he speaks publicly the same way he does privately. He's willing to tell people when he disagrees with them, which shows integrity. He went to the backbench to take a pay cut so that he could speak freely. I'm sure Andrew's a great guy. I don't know Andrew is the difference. So, but it'll be interesting to see. Look, some of the other things Canavan outlined, we've discussed this one before on this show, Gene. Income splitting. He came in again in defense of income splitting, which is effectively an income tax cut in some situations. Like you said, more states and cities. He framed his criticism of immigration similar to how Tom, if people took your and my comments combined, where he didn't say just cut all immigration. He said we need to severely scale back the student visa programs. And someone asked him, what about skilled work visas? And he said, well, I wasn't trying to cut back skilled work visas. I was trying to cut back on this rort that we all know is a rort, and we all do. It's the student visa program as just a backdoor way to get permanent residency, which, by the way, my simple solution is make those temporary visas that can never be converted to permanent residency. And then you take away anyone who's coming for a backdoor visa because they have to leave again. But anyway, that's for another day. He also talked about, he talked a lot about the net zero stuff and about how the way we're achieving carbon emissions reductions in this country is that we're effectively locking up land. We're taking increasing amounts of land away from farmers and just letting it return to scrub, which that seems like a daft policy. So I'm sympathetic with him there. His other big thing is, hyper Australia. He wants Australia to go to the moon. He didn't say it, but he was saying the Australian Space Agency, we need to shoot rockets into space. New Zealand's beating us in the space race. So we need a Cold War with New Zealand to see who gets to the moon first. I'm dramatizing somewhat, but that's the sort of thing that it sounds fun and is probably a political winner. There may be a case for it if the space is the future, but that's the sort of place where maybe it's better when Elon Musk does it than the taxpayer, but I guess we will see.
Oh, we're going to have a Cape York space base again. Remember when Sir Joe was looking at that in the 80s, Cape York space base.
How old do you think I am, Gene? I don't remember that.
Oh, there was a lot of excitement about that at one stage, I remember. Yeah.
I would be very interested to see the details of his trade policy, though, because he makes quite a good case in saying we are already really leaning in on using anti-dumping measures, which is just cheating protectionism. But it's cheating protectionism that is hit and miss, and it goes especially to people who are politically well-connected.
Yeah.
And he points out that in some cases, the consequences of our anti-dumping measures are the equivalent of 100% tariff. If that's true, if we've got all of these inconsistent 0, 50, 5, 100% tariffs all over the place, where the protection depends on the degree of political connection, then some amount of low consistent tariff may actually be an economic improvement as well as hit the sweet spot politically. So I'll wait to see the details before I get too excited, but it'll be interesting.
But would you? So the way that the AFR is framing this is that they're pitching Canavan against Taylor, and they're saying that Angus Taylor represents traditional neoliberalism or traditional conservatism, or the Howard sort of policy of belief in free markets, free trade, and Matt Canavan is more protectionist. He's going back to McEwen. So is it Blackjack McEwen who believed in the tariff wall? Mm-hmm. So do you see that as a risk, John? That's what I mean. I think there's not enough in Matt's speech at the moment to be worried about that quite yet. But I'd want to see his specific policy. But that's how the AFR's pitching it. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that framework? That how they're characterizing it?
Well, it's potentially a political advantage if they can pitch their party in two different ways to two different voting blocks. Now, it depends on whether there actually is a division behind the scenes. I think the media has an incentive to play up the divisions. Angus Taylor isn't a radical free market libertarian, right? He may just be marginally more free market than Matt Canavan and Andrew Hastie. But also, as far as I can tell, Hastie and Canavan aren't radical Blackjack McEwen protectionists either. I suspect the difference between the two isn't that great and comes down in large part to political positioning for a sort of a voting bloc audience. If that's true, if they actually get along behind the scenes, then they could publicly just use very different words, and potentially Angus Taylor can pitch to one audience, more corporate audience. Canavan and Hastie can pitch to another audience. They shake hands behind the scenes and round up both sets of voters. Again, I don't know what happens behind the scenes, but I could see a way for them to use this to their advantage. Tom, am I dreaming?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the Fin review's just playing up the divisions, and I think it's too early to make easy demarcations between the Liberals and the Nationals on these issues. But traditionally speaking, the Liberal Party has been more supportive of an open economy, and the National Party, or especially the Country Party, its predecessor under John Blackjack McEwen in the 50s and the 60s and early 70s, represented what was called agrarian socialism. Yeah, I don't think Matt's quite in that camp, but he's more interventionist than Angus Taylor, certainly. As is Andrew, who's a Liberal.
Yeah. RW makes an interesting point here. We're talking about these Liberals and Nats. Of course, both of those parties are well behind One Nation in terms of being the dominant right-wing party in the opinion polls. Any thoughts on whether Matt Canavan's agenda is going to move the needle on that, or is it all just too late?
I think One Nation on economics is actually quite interventionist.
Yeah.
One Nation is not championing free market economics. One Nation is, as I said before, reflecting that trend you're seeing all across the European continent and in the United States, where they're more economic nationalists and more interventionists.
I'm not saying it's wrong, but can you give me an example or two? Because Malcolm Roberts certainly thinks himself as a free market man.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, one of the big public policy challenges that we face as a country concerns cutting the spending of those government programs where spending as a percentage of GDP is skyrocketing. So NDIS, Gonski schools, aged care, childcare, public hospitals, defence. One Nation doesn't want to cut any of those programs.
Now, I haven't read their policy in depth. If anyone, One Nation, is listening in and you want to write in your responses here, we could have a written to spoken argument. I would be surprised if they didn't want to scale back on NDIS. That seems like something that everyone's talking about these days. I know they wanted to abolish all departments related to climate change, and I think half the Department of Environment. They did outline a series of spending cuts that they thought added up to $30 billion or something like that, which, if true, is probably more policy detail.
The biggest spending programs as a percentage of GDP are the ones that I outlined.
Well, it's pensions and healthcare are the killers.
Care economy. It's a care economy. Yeah, it's just ballooned in the last 10 or so years. Both sides of politics have been guilty of presiding over the expansion of the welfare state.
Yeah, pretty much no one's going to go to an election saying I'm cutting pensions or I'm cutting Medicare.
But the point is, as we've discussed before on these types of programs, John, if we don't reform those programs, they're not going to be around when the crunch hits.
Oh, I mean, we talk about it here. I'm just saying in terms of comparing One Nation with Liberal and National Party, I'm not sure that the Liberals and Nationals are going to go to the next election with a more austere policy set of cuts to Medicare and aged pensions than One Nation is. They may end up balancing each other out on those. But I mean, I haven't read the details of the policies of any.
Well, there was a bipartisan consensus with Labor and the coalition about 18 months ago on aged care. I don't know what One Nation's position was on the reforms to aged care. And the consensus was that those reforms worked. But I think One Nation could do a lot to boost their intellectual credibility if they put more substance into their policy outlines. And when I see Pauline Hanson talking, I do this program with Chris Kenny on Sky News every Wednesday, and I'm immediately preceded by Pauline Hanson. And she does, I mean, she's a decent lady, and I think she's tapping into legitimate anxieties in the community. But there's just no there when it comes to policy substance. Now, you might say the coalition's just as bad. I don't think so, but I just find that One Nation is lacking in terms of substance. And when they do spout policies, they're more slogans, and their economic policies are more economic interventionist than the coalition.
Yeah, look, I don't want to throw too much shade here. I don't mean this in a mean way, but I think it's fair to say Pauline Hanson is not a member of Mensa. She's not the most eloquent speaker, and I don't think she's a deep policy thinker. I think that's one of the things that's held the party back. But in defense of One Nation, they are more than just Pauline. I mean, Malcolm Roberts is a deeper policy thinker. And he would fit in. I mean, he's probably going to be on this show in the future. His conversations would fit in very easily with ours. We would be talking the same language.
Yeah, he by the way, has been outstanding on net zero too, hasn't he?
He's been outstanding on a lot of issues. Now, I don't think he's perfect, but I don't think anyone's perfect, except myself, of course, on policy. But he is a fellow traveller on a lot of issues. I think Barnaby Joyce has a unique political talent. I think he's underestimated as a policy mind. One Nation's policy details, some of them are a bit wishy-washy. I like kittens, I like unicorns, but that isn't too dissimilar to what I see on every other political party, including Liberal, Labor, and the National Party. Everyone writes down they like kittens before an election. So I hesitate to judge them too harshly yet. I think if your critique was just on Pauline, you're on stronger ground. But if the idea is that the whole party has dropped the ball on policy formation, compared with Liberals, I'm not sure.
Has anyone seen a good article in the press, Financial Review, The Australian, on One Nation's economic public policy agenda?
No, what was it?
I don't know. I'm asking the question.
a summary of it.
I haven't seen really anything substantial, and that's because I don't think they really put it out. And to the extent that they put out policies, they're more interventionist than the classical Liberal positions.
Well, I don't think any of them. I don't think the Australian or the AFR have been taking them seriously up until recently.
Well, they ought to, because as you know, their primary vote's higher now than the coalition.
Exactly. Yeah, but there's still this focus on what's happening in the coalition. But yeah, you're right. I mean, mate, that's something that Keogh and his mates at AFR need to get onto. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, my understanding was that they've actually got more policy detail on their website.
Gene, there's a paper there for you for CIs. I don't want to do my old job, of course, but
yes, I'll talk. Yeah,
no, that'd be a welcome contribution to the public policy debate. An overview of One Nation's economic policies. Seriously.
Yeah.
Get a lot of media attention.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, I'll keep that in mind. One thing I'd say though is that it may be the case that the detailed policy work matters much less now, given that people are really concerned about these existential issues, or they're concerned about terrorism, they're concerned about immigration, and it's not the actual detailed policy work that they're going to be impressed by. They're going to be impressed by the conviction or the direction that they see the different parties as having. And I think at the current moment, rightly or wrongly, people think that One Nation is the party that is best placed to deal with those issues, regardless of whatever the policy details are. They just get that sense that they've got the conviction they're heading in the right direction on those issues.
Yeah. All right. So I hope you guys can see this. I think you can. I'll just quickly go to their website now. So /government, they've got a budget savings of up to 90 billion per year. That'll be interesting. The trick to this is it capital savings or recurrent spending, which, but to be fair, Liberal and Labor and National, they all play those same games of being cheeky with the numbers they use. Abolish a department, streamline federal functions, reform the NDIS to its original purpose, introduce means testing.
Okay. All right.
Restructuring multicultural funding, abolish, afuera, should be gone. Integrating healthcare oversight. I don't know what the review. So they've got some details here. Look, I agree that it is often not discussed in the media, although having been involved with a minor party for a long time, there is a constant frustration that we scream policy details into the void for a decade. And after a decade, the media comes to us and says, why haven't you given us any policy details?
There was a very good paper published by Lyndon Rowe, who at the time, this was back in 1998, I'm going by my memory here. In 1998, when Pauline Hanson's One Nation won something like 20% of the vote in the Queensland state election. This is when Peter became Premier. And Lyndon Rowe from the WA Chamber of Commerce was commissioned by the IPA, the Institute for Public Affairs, to write a major paper, and it was called Strange Bedfellows or Odd Bedfellows. You could probably look it up. And his argument was that the Greens on the left and One Nation on the right on economic policies overlapped on a wide range of issues, especially foreign investment. Now, has it changed to a great extent in the last 25, 30 years? Don't know.
Well, I think that's a task for us, Gene. We're going to have to actually get a spokesperson for One Nation on this show. Maybe get them and Tom. There you go. Fight night. We have a debate on respective economic policies. But I think we're a little bit out of our depth here. I'm partially defending them because I am aware that Malcolm Roberts has put in some decent work on some policies, and there's a lot of policy detail there that no one reads. And after not reading it,
you've got to be careful. You want to distinguish the Libertarian Party from One Nation. You don't want to get too close to them, right?
Well, I am trying to now speak as a politically neutral commentator, but happy to talk to anyone who is open to good ideas. Now, obviously, the Libertarian Party has the best policy ideas floating around, especially the ones that I wrote back in the day. But look, there's good ideas and good policy thinkers in a range of parties, right? So, and I am trying to take off my retail political hat in this version of myself to maximize the number of people who will take my phone calls. if that makes sense. So, but yes, anyway, so one quick thing on One Nation, now that we're talking about it, well, I think I'd mentioned this before. They are now polling ahead of the Liberals and Labor in Victoria in the lead up to the Victorian state election, which could end up creating a remarkable outcome. Now, there was a lot of skepticism about whether the polls would sustain through to election night. We have now seen South Australia, and the election outcome ended up being quite consistent with the polls in South Australia. So do you guys have any thoughts? I know it's a long way away from the Victorian actual election, which I believe is November this year. But if they keep this up, are we about to see a revolution?
Well, it's too early to say, I think. There's no question there's a lot of momentum behind One Nation. And, political realignments are real, and it's happening around the world. You look at the British political establishment on the right, the Tories are bleeding votes to Nigel Farage and Reform. The Conservative Party in France is really on life support. A lot of its support has gone to Marine Le Pen's old National Front Party. The same thing's happening in Italy and Germany. The Christian Democrats are bleeding votes to the AfD. And the same thing's happening here, I think. America's a bit different. It was more a hostile takeover by Trump of the Republican Party. The party of Reagan no longer exists. It's the party of Trump. But the One Nation threat is very real. The big challenge, of course, is converting their relatively high popular primary vote into seats. And I think that's going to be the real challenge, both in Victoria and at the federal election in 2 years' time, converting their reasonably high popular vote into actual seats in the House. That's going to be very difficult. The other challenge, of course, is preferences. Don't assume that all of One Nation preferences will go back to the coalition.
Well, it may be the other way round is what matters.
Turnbull nearly lost the election in 2016 was because One Nation preferences, more of them, I think, went to Labor than they did to the Liberal Party or the LNP. Extraordinary. So preferences really, really do matter, and the coalition and One Nation need to get their acts together, because if they don't work in tandem, that'll only help Labor.
That is certainly true, although the issue of where One Nation preferences go might be a moot point if they are polling literally top, right? If they're polling first, they don't distribute their preferences. If they're polling second, they don't distribute their preferences. Yeah. The issue that may help the Liberals is that presumably when Labor runs third, Labor's preferences will go to the Liberals over One Nation. But just looking at South Australia, the South Australian outcome, One Nation did get more votes than the Liberals. Liberals did get more seats than One Nation. That's partly just because the Liberal vote was more focused in the seats they were targeting. But it was only 5-4, 5 seats to the Liberals, 4 to One Nation. If One Nation got picked up a few more percentage points over the Liberals, they would potentially be picking up a majority of those right-wing seats. Yeah. And then, of course, the difference between South Australia and Victoria is South Australia had a very popular Labor premier. And so Liberals and One Nation were fighting over the scraps, 9 seats between them. Yeah. In Victoria, the incumbent Labor government is not popular, which could create a very interesting situation where instead of, like in South Australia, most seats were just a lock for Labor and they fought over the scraps. In Victoria, a lot more seats could be up for grabs, and it'll be fascinating to see what happens. And, all bets are off at this point, but we should do a live stream following that. That could be fun.
I mean, with Victoria, it's not just that they're not popular, it's they're just hated, despised. I mean, loathed. I mean, even by people who are traditional Labor voters down there. I mean, everyone's just fed up with that government. It really has to go. I mean, just worse.
That's why One Nation is outperforming Labor in Victoria, which is not a sentence you thought you would ever say.
Yeah.
Anyway,
the voice referendum failed abysmally in Victoria. It was like 56-44. Not many people saw that coming. Most people throughout the course of 2023 would have thought that if one state was going to vote for the voice, it would have been Victoria, but it didn't. Overwhelmingly failed.
Everywhere except the ACT, which just goes to show we should nuke Canberra. Speaking of nuking places, that might be a good opportunity to have a segue here.
Yep.
Look, I was going to discuss the sort of preparations and discussion and scuttlebutt about the budget, but time's getting on. We're heading up to the hour mark. I might put a pin in that. We'll come back to it next week, gents, if Gene, if you agree with that.
Yeah.
And we'll dive into the idea of whether we should nuke Canberra or Tehran, if we have to choose one, or none of the above. I guess that's an option, Gene. Yeah, spoil sport. Of course, there's been a lot of news coming out of Iran. I am a political tragic, so I've been updating my news feed far too regularly over the last couple of weeks. But if you are a normal person, you might not have been doing that. So we can give you an update. And I gave him no warning. But since Tom is the geopolitical wizard of the three of us, Tom, I'll throw you under the bus. Could you give a wrap up of the last week of Iran, US, Israeli insanity?
Well, this war that the Americans and the Israelis launched on Iran, going back to February 28, now 6 weeks, it's been a disaster by all accounts. You think about the demands that the Americans and the Israelis imposed or tried to impose on Tehran. They wanted to eliminate Iran's nuclear enrichment program. They wanted to dismantle its missile arsenal, its ballistic missile arsenal. They wanted Iran to sever its ties with the militia proxies like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Shia militia, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen. And they wanted to bring down the regime in Tehran, regime change. And none of those four conditions has been met. It's extraordinary. And it's cost the United States a lot of money, a lot of their own military arsenal. And the worst thing is now is that Iran has actually strengthened its hand. It's strengthened its leverage. Now essentially controlling the Strait of Hormuz, which controls something like 20% of energy exports. It's extraordinary. So this has been a humiliating defeat for Donald Trump, and he knows it. He's completely underestimated the strength of the Iranian regime. And he's agreed to a ceasefire because he just wants to end America's war. But the problem he's got is that you're not going to get a meaningful peace deal between the Americans and the Iranians because the objectives are fundamentally incompatible. The Iranians are not going to agree to those American demands that I mentioned. And for their part, Tehran wants reparations for all the damage that the war's done to their country. They want sanctions relief. And they want an ironclad commitment by the Americans and the Israelis never to strike at Iran again. They're not going to get those conditions. So how do you square those circles? The answer is you can't. And you're going to have a non-negotiated status quo that is significantly different from what was in place before February 28. And that's actually to Iran's strategic advantage and not to America's or Israel's. It's a complete and utter debacle. And I've been writing this time and again in the pages of The Australian. Commentators, the online comments are overwhelmingly against me, but they're in denial. By any objective criteria, this has been a huge setback from America. And that's not to mention the damage it's done to American credibility and prestige and authority and legitimacy. It's just a debacle, guys. I'm sorry, I can't sugarcoat it.
And Tom, what does it mean for China and Russia? Where are they in this? Well, I know they're not actively supporting them, but are they supporting Iran behind the scenes? I mean, they're clearly probably happy with how this has gone wrong and gone bad for Donald Trump. What's their role in it?
Well, it's right. I mean, the Russians and the Chinese are in cahoots with the Iranians. There's no question about that. I think Russia's definitely a big winner just because the sanctions on Russian oil and gas have been lifted. And that, of course, will only help Putin in his war against Ukraine, which, of course, upsets the Europeans. But Trump felt that he needed to do that to help bring in more oil into the market. Otherwise, the oil price would have gone through the roof. So I think Russia is probably a strategic beneficiary of this conflict. China is probably too early to tell because they are invested so heavily in oil and gas out of the Middle East. But it's interesting to note that during the last 6 weeks, the Iranians have allowed the tankers and the ships that are going to China. They've been able to go through the Strait of Hormuz, but they won't, or they will intimidate oil tankers and ships then are not connected to China. So if that's right, China may well benefit from this. But the key point here is the Strait of Hormuz. That needs to be resolved. There needs to be open, free exchange of those ships and tankers through the strait. And even with this ceasefire, the Iranians are still controlling it. There's a very important article in the Wall Street Journal today. It's their lead story. And it's demonstrating to great extent how Tehran is already moving to formalize a more assertive posture in the waterway. Again, this wasn't the case before February 28.
Yeah.
And it's all well and good for Donald Trump to say, oh, this isn't America's problem because America doesn't rely on the Strait of Hormuz, and that's true. But what about all the allies in Europe and East Asia, including Australia, that rely on the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, just one quick economic point. China may be getting their shipments through, and the US may be able to produce enough of their own petrol. But it still does impact them because these are globally traded resources, and globally traded resources have a global price. The price impact shows up everywhere. China and the US are paying more for their petrol. So there is an impact that's coming through everywhere. So some of what Trump is saying, some of that is a bit of bluff and bluster. Now, for the people who have not been checking out your podcast, they should. But when you do, you will see, you've heard what Tom has to say. When Tom has guests, he politely pushes back and plays devil advocate. I'm going to try that now. Now, I don't think I'll do it as well as you do. But look, Tom, defenders of this war would point out that I'm doing my best imitation. That the US Army has come in, taken very few casualties, has wiped out the Iranian Air Force, has wiped out the Iranian Navy, has sufficiently set back their ballistic missile production capabilities. These all seem like military victories. Then Trump has promised to get in and out of a war within 6 weeks, and he's now potentially getting out of the war within 6 weeks, having achieved a bunch of these goals. Now, Iran has potentially agreed to open up the Straits of Hormuz again. If that happens, if the Straits of Hormuz open up, if he has achieved all of these military aims, if he has got America out of the war within 6 weeks and has lost relatively few, suffered relatively few casualties, is it entirely spin, or is it potentially there's some truth to the idea that he's got a military victory out of this?
Well, it only tells part of the story. I mean, as I said before, Iran's enriched nuclear material remains intact. And it remains, I mean, it's still there, right? The 400 kilograms worth of uranium. I mean, Tehran retains the capacity to produce more of it. The regime continues to support its Shia proxies, Hezbollah and the Houthi rebels, and of course Hamas, which is Sunni, in Gaza. And, you know, we've got the situation now with the so-called ceasefire. Israel continues to attack Lebanon. Iran will start launching missiles at Israel, and that'll end the 2-week ceasefire. But I get back to this fundamental point about the Strait of Hormuz. What you've said doesn't deny the reality that Iran's hand has been strengthened, and it's in the process of putting toll levies on tankers and ships that go through the Strait of Hormuz, which means that Iran may well have the capacity of raising $300 million a day in revenue. How is that a victory for America? I don't get it.
Yeah, I'm going to give up on playing the devil's advocate.
It is true. It is true that the Army and the Navy have been smashed, but they still have the capacity to launch these ballistic missiles.
Well, the Navy and the Air Force. The Army hasn't actually seen any combat because America, as the Iranian Lego songs keep mocking the Americans, they refuse to put boots on the ground, so they can't actually fight them. Those are some very amusing.
Look, we should make it very clear. I think we can all agree on this, that the Iranian regime, this Shia theocracy, is a pretty brutal regime. It'd be great to see it gone. I feel for all those Iranian diaspora, those in Australia and America who fled their country to come to freedom-loving Australia. They're very good people. They're decent people. And the people of Iran deserves a better government. But unfortunately, this so-called Operation Epic Fury has been an absolute debacle. and there's no sugarcoating it. And it's going to hurt Trump. I think the longer this problem continues and oil prices go up and Joe's six-pack across the United States and middle America has to pay higher gas prices, more and more MAGA Republicans will turn against Donald Trump. And this could really hurt the Republicans in November's midterm elections.
Yes, the counterpoint there is that they were already going to lose the midterm elections, so they may as well do what they think is right.
Well, they're going to lose the House of Representatives. They're still scheduled to keep the Senate, but they could lose the Senate, John.
The Democrats would probably have to flip Texas to take the Senate this election, which I know a lot of people are saying they could take the Senate, but it's still a tall order.
Given the Republican Party yesterday, I mean, they lost a lot of crucial seats in one-off by-elections, if you like. No, I think Trump. The thing about Trump is he's got an amazing ability of defying the odds. I've got this line I've used about him that every time critics like me, and I'm not alone, but we give him the kiss of death, it's mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. He revives and bounces back with tremendous force. But perhaps on this issue, on Iran, he may well have overreached, and this could haunt the rest of his presidency. And remember, he's president for more than 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Well, I suspect he's not going to get much done other than potentially foreign policy for the last 2 years, because if he loses the House, he's going to struggle to get much done.
He's got an off-ramp in Iran, and it's called Cuba. Keep an eye on Cuba.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I was going to, just before we get on to Cuba, I was going to ask, there is a nominal ceasefire. As soon as the ceasefire was called, Israel engaged in, I think, the largest carpet bombing attacks of civilian Beirut from the war, like the biggest single attacks, I think it was.
265 people died yesterday just in Beirut alone.
Yes, which of course, for the people not following along too closely from home, Beirut is not the Hezbollah stronghold, right? There are known Hezbollah places that were bombed up until yesterday. Yesterday, Israel just went all out on Lebanon proper. Now it is interesting to try and unpack what that is. Was that Israel going, oh dear, we're going to have to stop bombing Lebanon. Let's give them one last really big bomb on the way out so that we can say, look what we can do, and then we're going to have peace? Or is Israel trying to proactively sabotage the peace deal by ramping up the Lebanon war, knowing that that's likely to drag Iran back in, then with the possibility of dragging the US back in?
Opinion varies. I mean, both those explanations are plausible. I don't know for sure what's going on, but I'm very confident that the Israeli government of Prime Minister Netanyahu wasn't happy with the ceasefire. I think that's a fair assessment, and it's in their interest to prolong the war. I think Israel has some serious manpower problems, and this is only going to get worse because they're overstretched. The IDF is overstretched in Gaza, the West Bank, southern Lebanon, even parts of Syria, and of course now with Iran. And, the population is only 8 million people, and the younger generations of Iranians are increasingly conservative and religious, and they don't want to fight in wars. They don't serve in the army. So
Israelis, you mean? The younger population?
Israelis, yeah. I think it's only going to get worse from a demographic perspective for Israel. And they've got a president who's more or less on their side, and they're probably hoping this is their best opportunity to knock off Iran. But unfortunately, the regime looks more durable than most people had the right to expect 4 or 6 weeks ago.
Well, I didn't expect there to be a regime change from aerial bombing, because I think we've known since the Second World War it has a basically 0% track record of success. So it's not that hard a prediction for failure. But in terms of
ground troops,
I don't want to give them ideas, Tom, but that's the conventional wisdom.
Look, John, just to be precise, you're talking about the aerial bombardment of Europe. I mean, the aerial bombardment of Japan ended up ending the war. So we can't say that it's completely ineffective.
Oh, but that's the exception to the rule, Gene, I think. That's John's point.
Well, I don't even think it is, but I don't know how much we want to get into the nuance of the history of the end of World War II. The internal memos of the Japanese ruling council at the time, when they dropped the atomic bomb, it was like, there was another bomb anyway, who cares? And then when they found out that the Russians has flipped and declared war on them, then they all went crazy, pulled their hair out and said, that's it, it's over for us. So the internal memos in Japan suggest the war ended because Russia flipped. But I know we need to tell ourselves it was the nuclear bombs, because if it wasn't the nuclear bombs that ended the war, we just killed 300,000 innocent civilians for no good reason. So we better make up a good cover story. Otherwise, we are evil bastards. So
we'll save that for another episode, John. We should have a big debate about a discussion about that. But yeah, I don't want to sidetrack us. Yes.
Okay, can I ask then, taking away the normative discussion of Israel's action, just the purely predictive, looking into the future, is Iran going to take the bait? If Israel keeps bombing Lebanon, will Iran take the bait? Or I don't know if we kind of call it bait. Will Iran respond? I don't know if they have already. They've been saying they will all day. I haven't actually seen evidence of missiles flying yet. So it may be that Iran's holding off and will potentially leave Hezbollah out to dry. And then if Iran does respond, will the US take the bait? Will the US jump back in? Will we just get back to where we were a week ago? Is that what you think is the likely?
I think that's the more interesting question. I think that Iran probably will fight back against Israel during the course of the next 2 weeks. Trump wants to get out of this war. He wants to shut it down. And you're not going to get a meaningful peace settlement for the reasons I mentioned, because the goals of the goals of the Iranians and the Americans are fundamentally incompatible. But Trump wants to get out of there. And if that means the Strait of Hormuz is not resolved, then so be it. And that means that allies in Europe and Asia have to worry about trying to open it up, or just accept the new status quo, which is Iran, controls the strait and just puts a heavy toll levy on passing ships and tankers. Look, I think the issue about the United States and Israel is very interesting. There was a very important front page story in the New York Times yesterday by Jonathan Swan, the Australian journalist, and Maggie Haberbaum, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. And it went into great detail about the situation room in the White House in the lead up to the February 28th strike. And the journalist made it very clear that Israel played a very important role in encouraging Donald Trump to support the strike. And I think Trump's probably now looking back at Netanyahu thinking he's been led down the garden path. He thought it'd be a lot easier, a strike on the regime, culminating in the death of the Ayatollah and senior military generals. That would be enough to bring down the regime, a quick hit in and out, a bit like what he did with Venezuela in January. But it hasn't worked out like that. And he just wants to get out. He doesn't want to preside over another forever war. And that means that he's probably going to clash with the Israeli leadership. And it's very rare for the United States to disagree profoundly with Israel. They're very much close partners. So this will test that relationship.
Well, counterpoint, if I may. If the US really did want to get out of this, they would be saying what Australia and Europe and Iran and Pakistan and pretty much everyone in the world except Israel was saying, which is, of course, the ceasefire covers Lebanon. Now, if the US said that, then they could paint themselves as saying, look, we've done our part. And if Iran strikes back Israel, we won't strike back because, we've said that the ceasefire is supposed to cover Lebanon. So we've washed our hands of Israel and we're no longer going to fight on their behalf. That would be the course if they wanted to wash their hands of this war. But the US in the last day has come out they've come out very strongly saying that they fully back Israel, that Lebanon is definitely not covered in this war.
Oh, I know that.
Iran attacks Israel, then Iran is breaching the ceasefire. So America is talking themselves back into a corner where they're going to have to go back to war, aren't they?
Yeah, but I don't think Trump wants to, for the reasons I mentioned before. This is why I think it's going to be very interesting the next 2 weeks, how it all plays out. I mean, putting this in a broader context, these are the most intellectually exciting times for foreign policy since the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's a watershed moment, potentially. I wrote a piece about this in The Australian. You think about watershed moments when dramatic historic events upend the existing way of doing things. So obviously the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, that was the end of the Cold War and the beginning of American unipolarity. Then you had the September 11 terror attacks in 2001, which ignited the global war on terror. And as a result, all those forever wars, which helped set the scene for Donald Trump's emergence on the political scene. And then there was a global financial crisis in 2008, which emboldened the power of government. And of course, QE over a generation. And then you have the COVID lockdowns, and we know about the legacy of them. I think we are now going through a period where American power and prestige are going to dissipate dramatically. I think they'll still be the most powerful country in the world. I just think their influence and their credibility and prestige have taken such a massive battering, and that's going to have a huge impact on global affairs. This is how significant I think this moment is. And the next 2 weeks are going to be very interesting for the US-Israel relationship for the reasons I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Yes, well, people have been asking the question, what explains America's seeming subservience to a country of 9 million people with the space that takes up less than New Jersey, as is often explained in the American context. Given what should be the relative power imbalance, this is, I guess, a rhetorical question, but people are increasingly asking, why is it that this small country seems to be able to lead around the world superpower by the nose? And is it possible? Is it humanly possible for anyone in America to say no? Because the fact that Trump has fallen into line immediately now on this Lebanon issue surprised me, because I would have thought that's the point where he would say no.
Well, that's still playing out. This is a fluid situation, so we don't know what he'll do. And he's someone who can change his position very quickly, to put it mildly. Look, I think
can I ask?
All the available polling evidence shows that younger Americans, younger Democrats and younger Republicans, they're not so much turning off Israel, but they're turning off the idea that America should be giving unconditional and unqualified support to Israel. I think
they're turning against Israel. I think you'll find that I think it is ticked over now. There is now more sympathy for Palestine than Israel on average amongst younger Americans. And more than 50% of Republicans want America to step away, and more than 70% of young Democrats.
Guys, I've got to go very soon. Is that okay?
Whatever your wife says has to be the order of the day. Can I say just one last thing on the Iran situation? Then, if your wife gives me permission.
That's right, mate. Just be very quick. Sorry, I'm in another room. That's all.
If the world is potentially changing at this point, then, and America doesn't have the capacity to project force all around the world, one potential outcome here is their bases in the Middle East have apparently been blown up. There's a possibility that Kuwait and Bahrain and UAE have decided it's not fun to have a big target on their back. Is there any chance that America is going to be pulling out of the Middle East? Because that would be a massive strategic win for Iran, and Iran rewriting that area. But America's very unlikely to want to give them that win. But if the bases are already gone anyway.
Well, look, this is very interesting, and it fits my watershed moment thesis. Since the end of the Cold War, America has exercised global hegemony, if you like, unipolarity. It's been the balancer of first resort in all the major theatres. So the Persian Gulf, Europe, East Asia, and obviously the Western Hemisphere, which is America's backyard. I think what's going to happen is America's probably going to reorder its priorities away from Europe. Trump wants out of NATO. You might be right about the Middle East. Over time, America may well pull out of the Middle East. But it'll focus more on not just the Western Hemisphere, but in East Asia, because America's only peer competitor is the People's Republic of China.
And I guess last question then, where do you stand on the coming war against Turkey?
I've got to go, guys. Sorry.
Okay. No worries. See you, Tom.
All right. Thanks a lot for coming in, Tom. Cheers.
Right.
Don't know if you got the cheekiness of that last question.
Yeah, we have to talk about free speech, don't we?
Well, not free speech, the police state. But I will get to that. I just wanted, if you'll indulge me, Gene, and then criticize me where you think I'm wrong. One final rant on the Iran situation.
Okay.
As I understand it going in, the major impasse here, because both sides ask for a lot of things, but I don't think everything they ask for is actually the main game. The main game for years now seems to have been Iran wants the capacity to enrich uranium for what they call civilian energy use. And under the old agreement, they were allowed to enrich up to 3.7%, which is enough to be able to run your nuclear energy plants. You need to enrich to 90% to create a bomb. So there's a big gap between that 3.7 and 90%. And that was the status quo. Trump came in and said, I don't want them to be able to enrich it all, because that old deal was eventually going to lapse in a decade or so. And then at that point, Iran would just be treated like a normal country. And Trump said, I don't want that outcome. They have to have zero enrichment. They can't enrich their own uranium even to 3.7%. Right. So that was always the position of Israel. That wasn't the position of the US. Trump came in, that became the position of the US. And now Trump and Israel had their position. They cannot enrich at all. And Iran's response was, no, we are a sovereign country. Every sovereign country is allowed to enrich, like lots of other countries do. This is not for a nuclear weapon. It's 3.7%. We're not giving up our inherent rights. That, as I see it, is the fundamental disjoint that there seems to be no solution on the table for. Right. So there's talk about nuclear weapons. In terms of negotiations, no one's disagreeing. They may disagree now because, Iran may rush to a bomb given recent history. But up until now, or at least up until last year's 12-day war, Iran was fully signed up to the idea of having foreign inspectors to make sure they only had limited amounts of lowly enriched uranium for energy use. So you can say, look, I don't want them to have the bomb, but there was no actual negotiation impasse there. Because when it came to the negotiations, they were both saying no bomb. All right, so no disagreement there. There was agreement, can you enrich to 3.7% or up to 5% or whatever it is for civilian use? Trump said no, pulled out of the deal, imposed sanctions. So Iran, in response, went from 3.7 up to 5% and said, I want to go back to the deal, but if you're not doing the deal, I'm going to enrich a bit more to stick a finger in your eye. And then Iran said, please come back to the deal. Then a couple of years later, the US responded by killing one of the senior political military figures, Soleimani, in Iran. Yeah. Iran responded to that by saying, well, if you're killing our leaders, we're going to enrich up to 20%. No, it's still a long way away from 90% for a bomb, but it was another like poking your finger in the eye at saying, oh, you don't want us to enrich at all? Well, we're going to enrich a little bit more. But then they repeated, they'll go back to 3.7 and give up their extra enrichment if we can go back to the JCPOA, the old deal, or something similar. A year or two later, Israel then did targeted strikes, blowing up a bunch of nuclear facilities, killing a bunch of people. And in response to that, Iran said, well, we're going up to 60%. Note, still not 90%. There is no reason to be enriched to 60%. Now, critics of Iran say there's no civilian reason. There is no reason. There's also no military reason. There is no reason to enrich to 60%, other than to say, look, we can do this, but we'll give it up if you go back to a deal. And given that context, given each step there, Iran says, I'll do a bit more, but I'll give it up if we have a deal. I'll do a bit more, but I'll give it up if we have a deal. It seems to me, to any honest observer, that the reasonable interpretation of events there is that Iran was trying to negotiate to go back to a deal, to have that low-level enrichment that they've always claimed, and America and Israel, or Trump and Israel, has always said they can't have. I see still no solution to that, right? So that still seems the fundamental impasse. Last year's war was done to knock out some of these Iranian facilities. Iran came back and said, well, we defend our right to enrich for civilian use, not for the bomb, but for civilian use. We defend our right to do that. So after last year's war, I saw no way that was the end of the war. So I've been rabbiting on for like months now saying that I'm against the coming Iran war, and people thought I was a crazy person because what Iran war? What are you talking about? We finished that. We hadn't finished it. June last year left the fundamental issue unresolved. Can Iran enrich uranium for their civilian use? Iran still says yes. America still says no. They've gone to this war now. And as far as I can tell, America was ramping up the pressure saying, I'll bomb you, I'll bomb you, I'll bomb you unless you agree to this point. Iran did not agree to that point, and that's what kicked off this war. This war has ended, and Iran still doesn't agree to that point. In the 10-point plan Iran put forward, they said we must have the right to enrich uranium for civilian purposes. And in America's 15-point plan, it says you must never have the right to enrich uranium for any purposes. So I can't see where you square that circle. At the end of this 2 weeks, the only options are America goes back to bombing, or America gives up and says, all right, you can have some enrichment, or probably the more likely one is they just obfuscate and pretend they can't understand each other and sort of pass letters really slowly so that this just drags on as a weird sort of stalemate until after the midterm elections. But I would encourage people to keep an eye on both sides' commentary on that issue. there can't be a long-term peace until one side or the other moves, or maybe both, move on this issue. Right? If the US and Israel continues to say that it is unbearable for any enrichment, and Iran continues to say that they reserve the right to enrich, and someone tell me how that ends, other than round 3 of this war. So I would say look out for that, because if that's the issue isn't solved, nothing is solved. It's just we may be in another pause. Now, in the second pause of the Iran war, which started last year, we had a big pause between June and now. We're now potentially in a second pause, unless they can find an agreement on that crucial question. I guess they just keep going until one or other regime collapses. So anyway, your thoughts on that, Gene, if any, or?
I thought that was a good summary of the situation, John. I don't have much to add there. I mean, I can't see, I think the stalemate, I think we'll end up in that situation. That sounds most likely from where we're at. I don't think the regime will collapse necessarily. I mean, the US won't. I mean, Trump will keep going on as long as he's got life in his body. I think he'll continue on. There was talk about 25th Amendment, but I think that was just chatter. I don't think that's feasible, is it? It's very hard to implement, and I mean, Trump still has a lot of support amongst the GOP. But yeah, I think the stalemate is something we'll continue that we'll end up seeing. I think that sounds plausible. Yeah,
the 25th Amendment isn't going to happen. Look, it may be that they're back to war in a day or two or in a week or two, but I think more likely after the midterms, like February next year. But I don't think this is over one way or another. But the 25th Amendment, for those who don't know, is the idea that if you get the vice president and a majority of the cabinet, they can declare that the president is unfit for office and replace him with the vice president. The trick there is, of course, all of the people who get a vote to enact the 25th Amendment are people appointed by the president or the vice president who's elected along with the president. So that was just very unlikely to ever happen. The more interesting question will be impeachment. Trump will almost certainly be impeached early next year. Being impeached is just being charged with a crime. So that doesn't remove him from office. The House of Representatives in America, they do the charging, they do the impeachment, which charges Trump with a crime. Then the Senate sits in judgment. And the Senate actually has to vote, I think it's 2/3 to convict, which means you need 67 votes to convict. And of course, the Republicans, even if they lose the Senate, they're not going to lose that many seats. They're going to at least still have 34 seats. So that's very unlikely. And unless Trump actually did launch nukes and that turned 20 Republican senators against him, then he could be impeached and convicted. And if convicted, he would be removed from office and replaced with J.D. Vance. But that's a next year issue. And I think it's very unlikely. He will be impeached. I think it's very unlikely he'll be convicted.
Yeah. I mean, Trump at least seems to appreciate that he can't launch nukes. I mean, he can threaten it. He seems to be trying to implement this madman strategy. This idea from Richard Nixon. I mean, I think this originated from Richard Nixon because there's apparently, wasn't there a reported conversation between Nixon and Henry Kissinger where he was telling Kissinger, "Oh, my idea, I'll just make them think I'm mad enough to, really drop a bomb on them or something, so to give them leverage in their negotiations." So I think he's channeling Richard Nixon, but he's doing it in public. He's really, like Nixon was probably a bit more subtle about it, whereas Trump's just coming straight out on Truth Social and making the threats. It's quite extraordinary.
Well, the idea actually that comes from game theory, right?
Yes.
There is a game in game theory where it's a rational strategy to have other people think you're crazy. So it can be Pareto optimal for the person playing that strategy in the game, or optimal anyway. Anyway, one last thing to cover today, total change of pace then, is the newsletter. For those who don't know, the ATA, Australian Taxpayers Alliance, we put out a newsletter every week. If you're on the mailing list, you would have received it today. If you're not on the mailing list, please go and get on the mailing list, Oz Taxpayers, AUS taxpayers.substack.com. It's free to sign up, and we only send you the one email per week, so we're not inundating you with too many emails. But This week's email was about the issue of Australia's secret police. Now, the point I made at the beginning of this newsletter was building on the anecdote about the frog in boiling water. Gene, you'd know this anecdote, the idea that if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll jump out to save itself. But if you put it in normal water, increase the temperature slowly, it stays in there and slowly boils to death. Now,
it's
the funny
usually
thing
talked
about
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
the funny thing about that is it's not actually true. In reality, in biology, if you throw a frog in boiling water, it boils to death. If you put it in normal water and increase the temperature, it jumps out when it gets uncomfortable. So quite a boring outcome in reality. But the anecdote is still a good one to capture people's imagination and get them thinking about how when you suggest a big change, a big radical change, people often rebel against it. But if you suggest a bunch of incremental small changes that still add up to the same big change, people adjust to each small change as they go, and eventually they end up with a big change, but they're fully adjusted to it and they find it normal and they're not complaining about it. Jim, were you going to give an example?
No, well, I was just going to say that why I first came across this, I think it might have been Dr. Parkinson who I remember first using it, Martin Parkinson, talking about how this is why we need to do something about climate change, or we need to take early action, because we could be the frog in the boiling water and not realize it until it's too late. So it's that analogy has been used in the context of why we need to take early urgent action on climate change. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. Because I know we're talking about we're bagging net zero earlier, so I just thought I'd mention that. That's
and I will continue to do so.
Yes,
look, there's a bunch of it's these anecdotes being used in a lot of cases. Just a few examples are when Australia started as a country, 1901, total tax rate was about 5 percentage points of GDP. If anybody had run in the early years of Australia on an election platform of increasing that by 500%, right, taking it from 5% up to 30%, they would have been laughed out, right? It wasn't a serious option. Nobody was suggesting it, right? Literally no one was suggesting that. It was unthinkable. And yet, if you increase the tax rates bit by bit by bit over lots of decades, we now have a tax rate of 30%, and no one has really kicked up a stink about it. I mean, I do, but most normal people have just lived through, they've adjusted. You adjust to the last increase. You live for a while, you adjust to the next increase, and nothing seems like a big change. And so you end up in a very different outcome. Same with free speech. If they had tried the assault on free speech all in one hit, bundling all of the different legislation in one package, there probably would have been a big outcry. But instead, over the last couple of decades, we've seen like a dozen different anti-speech measures, one by one passing, sometimes a bit of pushback, but then they just wind it back 10% and then do it the year later. And so slice by slice, we've kind of given up our right to free speech in this country. The example I want to use here is the growth of the police state. Because over the last couple of decades, really over about 25 years, we have had dozens and dozens, I think over 70 new police state laws in this country, whereas there were very few introduced before that. But they've been introduced bit by bit by bit, and we've slowly got used to them. And now we are living in a very different world to what people understood as being the free world of the 20th century. And because it's happened slice by slice, no one really feels like we just woke up in Stasi Germany. And I'm not saying we're as bad as Stasi Germany yet, but no one feels like we're getting anywhere near that. No one feels like we have a secret police or a police state. But if you just introduced this all in one hit in the 90s, it would have seemed like an imposition of a state police and a secret police. This is the warning. My point about this as well is every single change has been in the same direction. It's not that some have increased state power and some have increased police power, but some have winded it back and then some have increased it. Every new change is a small, incremental, seemingly justifiable change to help protect people yet again, yet again, yet again. Repeat that 75 times, and you end up in a world where the state now has a lot more power over you than they did as in the world we understood as being a free person in the 20th century. And so that's kind of the warning here. Gene, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say, I think your comparison with the Stasi is a good one. So you're talking about East Germany when the Berlin Wall was still up. And I think the comparison with the Stasi, I think, is a good one because a lot of this is relying on people. Everyone's outraged at what someone said on Twitter or Facebook. And then I think there is going to be people dobbing in others or calling them out or doxing them, etc. I think that's a big part of it. And it is like the Stasi because when the Berlin Wall came down, they looked at the records of the East German administration. Wasn't it something like 1 in 6 East German adults were informants for the Stasi or something like that for the secret police? Yeah. Just extraordinary.
It was. Now, that's why I'm saying I don't think we're there yet because I don't think we have 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 people informing on their neighbors. But it is worrying that we are seeing campaigns now saying if your neighbor did something wrong, dob them in. I mean, you should have more loyalty to your neighbor than you do to the police trying to arrest your neighbor unless they are actually a psycho killer. So anyway, that notwithstanding, there was one particular piece of this police state apparatus that I wanted to dive into because it's back in Parliament. This was actually a law that was one of the most controversial. So there's been, like, as I said, over 70 different laws introduced. Most of them, politicians go out with bipartisan support and they say, oh, won't anybody think of the children? And everyone kind of nods and smiles. The media all goes along. It passes. People don't really pay attention. And then bit by bit, you add them all up and it makes a big difference. But the one I'm talking about now actually did spark a lot of debate at the time. This was in 2003. The Howard government introduced the ASIO Act. It was known as at the time. It was kind of our equivalent of the Patriot Act. All of the sort of anti-terror laws that were brought in the war on terror age. But when it was introduced, one part of it was to give ASIO powers that ASIO had never had before. So ASIO was just an information gathering organization. It's our domestic spy agency. Previously, they just gathered information. This gave them the power to detain people for up to a week. It's been wound back now to just a couple of days, but still detain people for up to a week without them even being suspected of anything. It's not like I'm charging you with anything. It's not like giving them police powers. It's giving them powers that police have never had, detaining people without a crime, without the suspicion of a crime, even if you know they haven't committed a crime. And then you can question them and they have no right to silence. So if they don't answer to your satisfaction, it could be 5 years in jail. They can do this to children as young as 14. You get some sort of legal representation, but not proper legal representation. And then they can kick your lawyer out and they can read all of the notes of your lawyer. And then remarkably, when they do let you out, you're not even allowed to tell people that you've been detained. Like you can be disappeared for a few days. And when you come out, you just have to say, oh, I don't know where I was. Sorry. I mean, these are remarkable powers to give our spy agency. And it kind of converted our spy agency into, this is a bit of hyperbole when I call them our secret police, but it turns them into an agency that can detain you in secret. So it is kind of a secret and it's a bit policey. Now, look, the secret police in the Soviet Union and in East Germany were worse, right? They're worse in many ways. They were far more activist. They did a lot more stuff. They had more leeway. They could detain you for more than a week and they could do worse things to you. So I'm not saying it's a direct equivalence, but why are we even starting to go down this path? I mean, the Western world, the free world, when we compared ourselves to the communist world, we've always prided ourselves that we did not allow people to be arrested unless there was suspicion that they'd committed a crime. And then we required a warrant, a judicial warrant, which isn't necessary with our secret police, with our ASIO Act, right? They don't need a judicial warrant. They only need a warrant from the Attorney General. So it's a political warrant, which is a very different thing. We've prided ourselves on having, judicial warrants. We've prided ourselves on the right to silence. We've prided ourselves on giving rights to minors. We prided ourselves on not telling people that they're not allowed to talk about being arrested. So the fact that we were willing to give those up, we shouldn't give them up easily. And to our credit, as a country, we didn't give them up easily. There was a big debate going through 2002, and the Senate was pushing back and blocking this. Now, in the lead up to, after the Bali bombing, in the lead up to the Iraq war, there was all this war fever, unlike the Iran war. The Iraq war at the time, there was a lot of rah-rah cheerleaders for the war. You have to get behind it or you hate Australia, all that sort of stuff. And in that context, the government was able to pressure the Senate into eventually passing this, but the Senate came up with a compromise, and that is we'll pass it, but only for 3 years. It is a temporary government program. Famous words, those, temporary government program. And so that was the compromise. You can have these extraordinary powers to detain people in secret. They can't have the right to silence and all of the rest of this stuff, but only for 3 years. And of course, that's not how it's worked out. We still have those powers. They have been renewed 6 different times. They were renewed in 2006, 2014, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2025. Right? So they constantly get renewed. The legislation currently before Parliament is to say that let's just take away the sunset clause. Let's just make them permanent. And this has gone through the House of Reps with bipartisan support, with barely a whisper, with not much commentary in the media. Very few people know about that this is going on. So we've gone from a situation where in 2003, there was a massive debate that went on for 15 months about introducing a secret police. And it was eventually squeezed through the Parliament by saying, don't worry, it's temporary. And now we're about to just make it permanent with hardly anybody paying attention. And so I wanted to make sure some people were paying attention, hence the newsletter for this week, hence me ranting about this today. I'm trying to draw attention to this because I think that this is a mistake. I think it's a mistake to make these powers permanent. And I think it's a mistake to do it without any public debate, without there being any pushback. So if you are sympathetic with those arguments, if you, like me, pride yourself on the West's tradition of more freedom than they had in the Eastern Bloc, right? That's why we were better. If you pride yourself on those freedoms and you don't want to give them up too easily, we can still fight. This has not passed the Senate yet. Now, look, I want to be honest about this. It probably will. It currently has bipartisan support. It is very hard to change the direction of politics at this stage. But at least we have to make sure they can't just get it through without anyone pushing back. And there is a game plan. There is a potential game plan that has worked this year. In January this year, the government was going to rush through with bipartisan support a bunch of hate legislation, which included a bunch of restrictions on so-called hate speech. Now, that looked like it was going to get rushed through very quickly with bipartisan support. Then there was a bunch of outrage. A bunch of just normal people started talking to other normal people saying, look at that, that's outrageous. Social media started going off. People started pushing back. And people started contacting, at the time, One Nation, saying, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And that pressure eventually convinced One Nation to come out against it and say, no, we do not want that. And then, of course, because One Nation was rising in the polls, the LNP had to look at that and think, oh, One Nation has taken a stand. And so LNP, Liberal and National backbenchers and mavericks, started taking a stand. Alex Antic, Andrew Hastie, briefly, I think Matt Canavan, a bunch of the good ones stood up and said, no, we don't want that. And the next domino was they went inside the party room and they convinced the Liberal and National leadership to oppose the hate speech rules. And in response to that, Labor dropped them. We currently do not have those hate speech rules. Unfortunately, we got all of the rest of the stupid laws at the time. The Liberals then rolled over and betrayed us all. Damn you. But there was then a template for how you can have success. You know, outrage amongst normal people gets One Nation to take a stand. One Nation takes a stand, forces the LNP people scared of losing their seats to One Nation to also take a stand. They go internally and hopefully convince their parties to change their position. So It's not likely. I want to be clear, it's not likely, but we do have some sort of game plan. So if you agree with me, there's a couple of things I would like to ask of you. One is, please amplify this discussion. Please share the newsletter. Go and if you're not subscribed to our newsletter, go and find it. Even if you don't want to subscribe, just go and find it online, oztaxpayers.substack.com. You can share it without subscribing if you don't want to subscribe, but share that around. Find people talking about this on social media. There's a few good people on X talking about this. Find what they're doing, like it, share it. Share this with your friends, right? Raise this topic with your friends and family. Share the articles, share the social media posts with your friends and family. Increase awareness. That's the first step. Secondly, if you can, if you have the time, please contact the One Nation senators, right? Build the volume of the furor and then tell the One Nation senators about it. We are worried about this. We do not like this. Please take a stand against this. And if we can get those two things done, then the next step is to try and make sure that the LNP is aware of this pushback. So that is what I'm suggesting at the moment. If nothing else, I don't want this to go through without some more people making a stand and saying, wait, stop. Don't just rush through the next step of police state laws without anyone even noticing or giving a fuss. I am concerned, so I'm trying to make sure there is some pushback. If you share my concern, please join me in the pushback. Let's see if we can do something about it. And the last one, and I'm really always bad at asking for support, but if you could help the ATA, that would be good too. So taxpayers.org.au for just a couple of dollars, and that can help raise our voice on this issue. But if you don't have the money, at least share the material, right? Let's share the material and get people aware of this issue. So Gene, what say you?
Look, I agree, John. I actually wasn't aware that this was being proposed. This is the making what was once temporary. This is ASIO having the power to detain people for days on end.
Well, it's for questioning up to 24 hours of questioning, and the 24 hours of questioning has to have gaps in it. So it just depends on how quickly they get through the questioning. They can detain you until they've finished questioning you. But they're only allowed to do 24 hours of active questioning.
Yeah, so as much as I am concerned about national security, this does seem excessive, and I tend to agree with you on this. So absolutely, I think free speech is such an important value. I would say, John, I was surprised you missed the opportunity to quote the great man when you talked about you're effectively saying there's nothing as temporary. What is it? Nothing's more.
You didn't read this. Hurts, G. This hurts. I'm imploring our listeners to sign up to our newsletter, and you're telling me now you didn't read the newsletter. I did.
Quote, yes, that's right. You did quote him there. Yes, you did.
Famous line,
exactly.
That there is nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. That's why I say temporary government program. Remember those words. But yes, thank you for picking me up on that one. But yes, what I find remarkable is, and I go back to the beginning story, it really is like that frog in water, if the frog in water thing was true.
Yeah.
Because back in 2003, there was pushback. And eventually it only passed because it was temporary. You turn around, you pass a bunch more police state laws, and now they're just ticking and flicking and making it permanent without any pushback. And it really showed there is a strategy for someone who wanted to just keep increasing the power of the state. There is quite an easy path. You just keep salami slicing it, and you get away with it.
Yeah,
and I don't want them to get away with it. So,
and is
join
this
me,
even
only dear listener?
And is this what they need? I mean, is this actually helpful? I mean, I think it's terrible from a civil, liberties and free speech perspective, obviously. But is this even what they need? I mean, don't they, or is it more resourcing that they need with enacting within the law, not going to these extremes? Aren't we having an inquiry, or we should be having an inquiry into what happened at Bondi? I know that Dennis Richardson resigned from that, which is extraordinary. I mean, that's a bit of a shame because, I mean, he's the type of person you want on that inquiry. But we should be trying to figure out what went wrong, because these, the two Bondi, the shooters, the ASIO was aware of them, but if I remember, but really wasn't really actively monitoring them. I mean, so something's gone wrong there, and we've got to try and figure out why did these two fall through the cracks and then went on to commit this horrible massacre.
Well, as the comment says, Gene, clearly it was the guns. They just they jumped up and shot themselves. So if we punish the law-abiding shooters, we'll solve the issue. I think that's a joke comment. Look, yeah. I haven't seen what's come out of that inquiry yet. The difficulty is that spy agencies will always tell you that they can't give you any details, but they really do need more money and power. Trust me, bro.
Yeah.
And that is basically how we've got to a situation where the CIA has a massive budget, can do anything they like. Like going back 40 years, they were able to just bypass the laws of their country to set up the Iran-Contra affair. We all found out about it, and they all just got more money and more powers the next year, and then more money and more power the next year, and then more money and more power the next year. And if you question anything, they just say, you want people to die. Don't you realize something scary in the world? We can't tell you about it, but trust me, bro. As I have limited faith in trust me, bro, as a strategy. We have a system of warrants and arresting people, and it's been built up over a long time, and it is imperfect. And some people get away, but you've got to balance different risks. And I think we are at the moment at risk of being unbalanced towards state power. And I don't think that is a thing that you can easily unwind. So you want to be very careful and judicious every time you give them more power. And certainly don't make it permanent. If you need to, roll it over another year, and we can have then a nice big debate with the public involved, not just asking the security agencies, hey, do you like having more power and money? Because they're going to say yes, right? So you need to ask the rest of us, do we like losing our power and money? So that is the issue of the week. Look, I was pleasantly surprised to see a few people on X, a few sort of young content creators, I don't know what to call them, who weren't that famous. At least they weren't that famous to me, but they were raising a bit of attention to this issue. Now, a few of them were framing it as this was entirely new legislation, which isn't quite right. It was introduced in 2003 as a temporary measure, and it's been rolled over as a temporary measure. Now, there are some new elements to this. For instance, ASIO can now use this power in more situations. So they are expanding the power, which is also a little bit dangerous, but just a little bit inevitable. And if we think that they'll just expand the power here and then they'll stop, what evidence do we have in history that the state or a police state or a secret police gets a bit of power and then they just go, oh, look, I don't need any more. No, that's fine. It's fine. I've got enough now. You can just stop there. So we got to draw a line somewhere. I say, let's draw a line here. If you agree with me, join me, contact One Nation, boost this on social media. Not just this video, because this is 2 hours long. People won't necessarily get to the end, but boost our post, boost the article, the newsletter I sent out today. Find the stuff other people are doing, because other people are talking about this. If you find it, like it and share it. It doesn't matter who gets the credit. What matters is that we build a loud voice.
So, John, why are we just contacting One Nation? I mean, shouldn't we be contacting whoever our members of parliament are? I mean,
feel free. So, good question, and feel free to contact everyone. But here's my thinking on this. Oh, go away, buddy. Here's my thinking. Labor has introduced the legislation. It's going to be very hard to get Labor to vote against their own legislation. The Greens are already against it, right, for civil liberties reasons. So good on the Greens on that grounds. So you don't have to convince them. All of the other independents, including One Nation, can't change the outcome. If the coalition vote for it, it's through. So the game is you have to change the coalition. Then my question is, well, how do you do that? What is the pressure points you can apply to the coalition, to the opposition? And I would say what we saw in January is the model that can work. If we can get One Nation to come out and say, we're defending your rights as a free person living in a free country, that will pressure the opposition. That's what will potentially wedge the Alex Antics and the Andrew Hasties and the Matt Canavans and force them to come out and say, no, we also agree with the freedoms of free people in a free country. So that's my reason for saying the first target should be One Nation. If we can get One Nation, we can use that to pressure the opposition into changing their policy, because it's gonna have to be a big thing. The opposition has supported this in bipartisan fashion every single time of the 6 extensions. And the opposition, the Liberal National Party, they're the ones that introduced the original legislation, right? So it's going to be a big move to get them to change. And the only thing I can think that's big enough to get them to change is the risk of them being caught out and being wedged by One Nation. So that's why I'm saying the first step is build a voice, build an outrage and an outroar about this issue high enough that it gets One Nation to take a stand. And I think it's only really One Nation taking a loud stand on this issue that would be able to force the coalition to change their position. That's my logic. But I mean, if people have another way of doing it, do whatever you think will work. I am all for a 1,000 flowers blooming. Try it your own way if you can think of something better. Does that make sense?
I think it generally does. I mean, I think the appeal to free speech is great. The one question I'd have, John, is like, what are you proposing as a substitute for this? Because I mean, what they'll say, like, I guess what they'll be worried about is, we don't want to look soft on terrorism, or, I mean, because we did have that, that awful attack at the end of last year. Won't they be arguing that this is necessary to prevent that sort of thing? And look, I know, arguments from necessity aren't, they can be abused. I mean, there's that famous William Pitt quote on that, of course. But I think that there is going to be a strong argument, and that's why people are going to want to be seen to be taking strong action. Will you be recommending something else to try to make sure that we are being tough on terrorism, that we are going to prevent these attacks from occurring in the future?
No. Look, realistically, if the LNP is going to move, they're going to create a narrative. They're going to go and test that on focus groups and the rest of it. And I don't know what that's going to look like. It's for them to work out.
Right.
It's for us to show them. It's for us to show them that there is a loud voice saying that we believe in Western freedoms enough.
Yep.
That we get sad when you take them away. And there is a cohort of people saying that. And then that gives them pressure to go and find some other way of doing it. Now, the easiest way, and I don't love this idea, but the easiest way would just be for them to roll over the temporary measure again for a few more years. That would still be an improvement on making it permanent, because it still gives us the ability to fight this in 2 years' time. But I would argue that we have so many laws on the books. 75 new sets of police state laws over the last 25 years. If it's really still not possible for the police to go and detain someone for questioning on suspicion of a crime using all of those laws that they've already got, then I'm not sure the need to be able to, secretly kidnap a 14-year-old and force them to answer questions under threat of jail is that one extra tool that they need. So... But anyway, I think there is a moment in politics here. Tom was talking about it earlier, the change in zeitgeist. I think some part of that change in zeitgeist has shown up, for instance, in people's defense of freedom of speech, even if that free speech could be really mean to, in recent history, Jewish people. And so then it was like, we're outraged, quickly shut down free speech. And as we showed in our fight back online and out in the streets, and then One Nation there was a pushback going, you know what, screw your safety concerns, freedom matters, right? Our whole Western civilization was built on some core concepts, and they matter, and we still care about them. And one of those ideas is free speech. The other one is you need judicial warrants. You can't get arrested unless there's a suspicion you've done something wrong. These are all core parts of sort of the Western civilization we've built up, which I like. I liked the successful free Western world. I don't want to keep giving it up every time someone says boo, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my case. People can agree or disagree. If you disagree, please accidentally forget to contact your politician. But if you agree with me, please do go out of your way and contact the good people in the LNP and One Nation and see if we can ramp up the pressure. And as RW was saying, there's other political parties that are talking about this. People from the Libertarian Party have taken an interest. The Citizens Party has taken an interest. There'll be a few others. But those smaller parties won't be enough to change the needle. But hopefully they can help us raise the volume. So that is my pitch. Let's go through some of the questions, Gene. Unless you have another.
Yeah. No. Good commentary as always, John. Good stuff. Let's go through the comments or questions.
I'm going back to the top, so we're going to be going back to stuff from the distant past. I think this one's for you, Gene.
Pretty bad. I mean, it could be up to 6% through the year. I think CBA saying that with the what we've seen already with the petrol prices rising, we're going to get up to 5 to 6% inflation through the year. RBA interest rates, I think we'll have another couple of rate hikes this year at least. So, I mean, we haven't focused a lot on that this episode. Well, we haven't talked about it at all, but I guess we'll have another look at a closer look at that next week or the week after.
Yeah, inflation's going to hurt for a little while. What the RBA does about it, that's a bigger variable. They'll almost certainly raise rates again. But whether it's once or twice or three times is the great imponderable. We'll get back closer to the decision. I think this was going back to the housing conversation. Cut immigration, reduce welfare dependence, cut taxes, help mitigate against the losses of immigrant workers. Well, that's a good point. I mean, it's not, we've discussed this before, right? It's not necessarily just an issue of numbers of immigrants. You want to also be selecting, and there's a bunch of ways to select. And one is you can simply say, I want these skills. Another one, which I've talked about before and we got called white supremacists, is you could say, look, I do prefer some cultures. And the one that's suggested here, which I also very much like, is you set the economic incentives and allow the immigrants to some degree to self-select. You say, we're not giving you welfare. We are allowing you to make money if you are productive and useful to society. If you're the sort of person who can make money and doesn't need welfare, we're the sort of country that you do well in. Or, because there's the possibility of another option. You could say, look, immigrants, come here. If you work hard, we'll tax the bejesus out of you, so it's not much point working. But if you're pretty useless, we'll give you lots of welfare. That will attract a different sort of immigrant, right? So the economic incentives you set up will also determine what sort of immigrants will want to come to your country. And so I think that's the point Taylor P is making. And if it's not, then that's the point that I'm pretending Taylor P is making, because that's the point I like.
Yeah. I think just on that, John, I mean, I think like the welfare benefits come when you get your permanent residency, I think, don't they? So, basically you'd make it harder to get that permanent residency. So there's that welfare attractor is not as strong, because that's clearly going to be part of the package of why is it so great to live in Australia? Well, because you get subsidized childcare, or you get, Medicare, etc. So, I think it's a fair point.
Yeah, I would make it much harder to get permanent residency and citizenship in this country.
Yeah.
That's we've discussed that before, that everyone else is focused on the stepping foot in the country. I think there needs to be a lot more focus on the idea of at what point do you actually get to buy in and say you're one of us. That is the thing I would significantly slow down.
Yeah.
Probably also fewer feet in the country. But I think my approach would lead to that as well, because people coming in for the temporary visas in the hope of upgrading, if I told them you can just never upgrade, a lot of those people just wouldn't bother showing up in the first place. But good point by Taylor P, I think. Yes, this is a comment to me, I think, when I was talking about body corporates. Body corporates are voluntary, right? I wouldn't make it mandatory. I'd say to people, this is an area, these are a group of people, you can come together and this can form a governance structure to help you sort of things out. The fact that they have evolved naturally everywhere where private developments have happened without the government suggests to me that there's some use for them, right? There's need to be able to coordinate picking up rubbish, filling in potholes, things like that. I've lived in townhouses before, in apartments where there's body corporates. I've been on the body corporate before. It's a normal way of coordinating small problems in local communities. And libertarians aren't necessarily just pushing atomized individualism where no one ever coordinates. We do live in communities. We live in societies. We need to be able to coordinate with our neighbors, and we need a system for doing that. But that system doesn't have to be a big government that screws everything up, right? There are governance solutions without too much government.
Yeah, I mean, this is
an example.
I mean, this is the subsidiarity principle, isn't it? We push the decision making down to the lowest level that we can. Isn't that right?
I agree with that, but I mean, this is they're saying the lowest. Implicit in what Brownie's saying here is the lowest level possible is the individual. So go all the way down to the individual. And I'm saying the truth is, once you have a free society, people don't necessarily just act like atomized individuals. They do naturally start building up governance structures again.
Yes.
Right. And these are voluntary opt-in governance structures. If you're a part of a cricket club or a footy club, there's a governance structure there. You don't just all show up and just play randomly according to your own rules. You buy in, you opt in, you pay in, someone sets rules, someone sits on the committee. They're able to, make rules and people have to follow the rules or leave the cricket club. Those sort of governance structures, I think, are inevitable. They're very normal and they're useful and they're a good thing. Libertarians aren't against people coming together in communities and governance structures. And I think local communities can be run like that. And I think if we had the option, if we facilitated those to build up, firstly, if we didn't have the government in the way, these would have built up naturally anyway. This is what planned communities look like. Right? Developers sometimes build planned communities and they have body corporates. In America, this is quite prevalent in local areas getting together with they don't call them body corporates, but it's basically the equivalent.
It's so the homeowner association, is it? You mean?
Things like that, yeah.
Yeah.
So they're quite a natural, organic development. And if they were more common, it would take away basically the argument for the local councils to be able to butt into any of our affairs. Because we've got all the governance issues solved, right? Because they always say, oh, who's going to do this? Who's going to pick up your rubbish? Or who's going to fill in a pothole? We've got an answer to that now, right? But when I lived in a townhouse construction, if the road on the townhouse was broken, the body corporate paid for it. We were able to do that, right? So they are solvable problems. And if we solved them through body corporate, we would decrease the argument for people to come along and justify big government. All right.
Yeah,
oh, that's true. This was when I was talking about the number of people per house.
Yeah.
Because I mentioned the divorce rate, but it's not just the divorce rate, it's a decrease in the marriage rate. And also just a decrease in the number of kids per house, right? So when you say, that would be an interesting question for Cam. When he says the number of people per house, I'd be curious to know, what about the number of adults per house? Because it might be the number of people per house has just gone down because there are just fewer children.
Yeah, good question.
Question for Cam. I don't know the answer to that.
There's definitely more people living by themselves, though. There's definitely more singletons, so we know that. So it's must be both.
Yeah, probably. Construction businesses going bust or shrink following the fixed price contracts. Yes, no, it's that's very true. We're living in a difficult world of a pincer attack of a bunch of different issues hitting at the same time. This is a follow-on comment from Taylor. Traditional home builders have transitioned to public builds for greater financial security. Well, that's the point I was making earlier about the crowding out.
Yeah.
Yes. This is Matt Canavan saying we have our own continent. Well, Ryan makes a good point. Maybe not for long. Taylor says, I think if the LNP has a shot at the Fed, I think that's the federal election, not the Federal Reserve. I don't know, maybe they could shoot something at the Federal Reserve. They have to come out preferencing one nation above Labor. Look, I think they're going to do that. They did that in South Australia. I think they've announced they're doing that elsewhere in Victoria. I think the LNP and One Nation will have a preference swap.
Gee.
They'll probably still lose the federal election. Greens have the same diagnosis as libertarians and laissez-faire people, laissez-faire overall, but their proposals are just wacky. I'm not sure they have the same diagnosis either. I can't remember what the context was of this coming up. Maybe the same diagnosis with the overreaching police state. I don't think that was what was being brought up at the time. But anyway, remembering. I'm not sure they have the same diagnosis. I don't think their diagnosis is distrust of large government and bureaucracy, because their solution to everything is more government and bureaucracy.
Well, I think the Greens think the problem is that all the greedy corporations and greedy property investors. I mean, so I think they've got a different diagnosis, but I can't remember the context that comment came up in.
Well, a growing number of elected Greens think the problem is just literally capitalism.
Yes.
I mean, there are some just out and out socialists now floating around. There's two avowed socialists, I think, in the New South Wales Parliament.
Yeah.
This was in relation to Matt Canavan. At a turning point in economics, can't we say we have tested free markets to the tolerable limit and interdependency isn't worth the most efficient use of resources, the most effective? I think there's 2 points in this that I'd like to make. The first is we have not tested free markets. I mean, the tax rate, the tax as a percentage of GDP has gone up. The real tax per person has gone up massively. We have more regulations than ever before. I don't know how you can say increased regulation, increased government, increased taxes, increased government spending on nearly everything is a free market experiment. Maybe you're saying to the tolerable limit. Maybe the tolerable limit of capitalism is just to always shrink. But Now, Malay is giving it a go in Argentina. He's actually shrinking the size of government. I mean, even Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan didn't shrink the size of government. They just stopped it growing for a few years, which, God bless them. That's a good thing. But I don't think we have the political situation of our time has not allowed us outside of Argentina to actually experiment with a free market solution to most problems. The second point you're making there is a good one, I think. And I kind of raised that when we were talking about fuel security, which is there's two questions to ask. One is what's the most efficient way to get the fuel in that context or anything else in this context. And the other one is if you consider potential constraints, then what would be the best way of doing it? Such as if the shipping lanes shut down or if a trading partner decided to hate us or go to war with us or embargo us. So I think in this more uncertain geopolitical environment, we need to start asking that question more often, which we still need to ask the first best because we need to know that, right? And when you can take the first best, take the first best. But I think we do need to more proactively ask the second best. The reason I want us to ask that question is that I fear there's going to be situations and people are just going to jump to any old solution before we've actually compared 4 or 5 different solutions to find which one is least bad. So that's why I want us to start considering, in the example of fuel, should it be coal to liquid or gas to liquid or biodiesel or switching to EVs that all get charged from coal-fired power stations or, or should we drill more? Or there are several different solutions. And I fear that the instinctive way of looking at this is either you go full free market, or if not, then you just do anything. Right? That seems to be the way this is framed, right? There's some people say, look, just go full free market. And that normally is the cheapest price and the most efficient allocation of resources. And if you don't do that, then just do anything you feel like. Subsidize this, subsidize that. Look, I've got a friend who does this. This sounds cool. And I'd really like us to have a more nuanced, careful conversation about which one of these backup plans actually is the best backup plan and which ones are just stupid and we can rule out. So, but I think the second part of your point goes to that. Don't know if you want to take this, Gene, because I've been talking too much, but this, I think, is referencing the lack of a manufacturing production jobs in the country and whether that'll come back to bite.
Oh, look, I mean, that is one of the issues we've got. And I think partly that is because we've, too much regulation, high labour costs here in Australia. So, yeah, that's an ongoing challenge. Manufacturing's been declining for decades. And, I think if we can get our policy settings right, then, I mean, manufacturing we might be able to get a revival of some kind, particularly if, we are seeing these greater risks internationally. If there is a hit to the services economy, then, we don't really have all those manufacturing jobs we once did to fall back on. So, I think that's a risk. Regarding a security risk, I think Taylor might be saying. Yeah, sure. I think this is where we've got to think about, well, like what is our framework for thinking about national security, and like what interventions or what public procurement do we need to make sure that we are able to produce what we need to here in Australia here. But we've got to make sure we don't abuse that and it just becomes an excuse for subsidising and protecting inefficient businesses. I think Taylor's point there in question, I think it's a good one.
So I was just checking the questions coming in. I was using that as an opportunity to not listen. Look, I think when in talk about manufacturing and production jobs, and Matt Canavan talks about this, a lot of people do, you need much cheaper energy. Right?
Yeah.
That's an issue where people like the Matt Canavans and the Hasties and the Angus Taylors and the Libertarians and ourselves, we could all get together on that the current approach to energy, which is to prioritize carbon emission reductions over cheap prices, was a major error in focus. And we need to get back to ensuring that our energy is as cheap as is humanly possible. And a lot of good can come from that.
Particularly if the rest of the world isn't doing it, right? I mean, if our competitors aren't doing it, which I don't think they are seriously. So, yeah, absolutely.
This is another point that the Straits of Hormuz is not just about fuel and fertilizer. Helium comes out of the Persian Gulf. So that could end up biting in Taiwan. I think we touched on that last week as well.
So needed for the AI Ponzi. So it's needed for all the chips, isn't it? Is that right? All these graphics processing units, the GPUs?
That's what I was saying in Taiwan, all the processors, they need it. So a question coming out of LinkedIn. Is the whole Iran war thing about reshuffling the rich people? This gives me an excuse to mention for several times in a row now, after a big change in policy, there has been somebody who's gone in and put a multi-million dollar, a massive bet, seemingly perfectly predicting the announcement just before it was made. So the insider trading in America is chronic and shocking. It should be much bigger scandal than it currently is. And even if it was a big scandal, it should be a bigger scandal because that is remarkably dishonest.
There are people who are pointing it out. I mean, this will definitely be, they will pursue that if there is a change. Well, if the Democrats get control of the House, and
there's no law against insider trading in America, I don't think.
Sorry, they've got
the politicians. I think the politicians are allowed to insider trade. It's not illegal in America for politicians to do insider trading.
I think we'd have to consult the relevant statutes about that, John. I mean, don't they have the SEC over there, Securities and Exchange Commission? I'm sure they'd have something to say about that. But yeah,
no, we can check it. I'll check it later. It's getting too late to check it now, but I think it's a carve out for politicians. This is true, but I'm taking a month off alcohol. I do this to myself occasionally, just to make sure I can prove that I'm not a total alcoholic. So that's why I haven't had my beer or whiskey with me for the last couple of episodes. That's a good point. We were talking about what's the solution to giving our secret police ever more powers. Well, we could just use those 200 police that New South Wales are employing to hassle people for social media posts and have them go around actually targeting terrorists instead of people writing mean words on Twitter. I very much agree, R-Dub. What form will liquid fuel rationing likely take place? I don't think we'll get to that. It looks like if the Straits of Hormuz open up, then we will probably be able to squeak through with just higher prices solving the allocation of fuel for us. So that's, but look, if the war kicks off again, then who knows? If we get unlucky, who knows? The rationing would probably look like, if you're not there would be no rationing for key workers, right? What did they used to call it during the COVID times? The special protected
essential workers. Were they essential?
Workers, yeah.
Yeah,
they were essential. Yeah. So I don't think there'd be rationing for essential workers, and non-essential workers would probably have I think the plan was a dollar limit. A dollar limit per day. So as the price went up, then that effectively meant the amount of petrol you could get each day would go down. I think that was the plan that had been set beforehand. This plan had been written a while ago, but hopefully we're going to avoid that now. Inflation should be near 0%. I'm not sure what the basket of goods of black and gold soap and salt probably. Well, I'm not sure what this question's asking, but I will just choose to answer it however I like because I can do that. And that is, I think the target should be 0%. Inflation isn't 0% at the moment. It's far too high. But I am in a minority amongst economists in thinking that we should be targeting, or at least a lower target. We've got basically a 2.5% target at the moment between the 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Between 2 and 3%. So as a point estimate, say 2.5. I'd like to see that lower. I'll compromise and say I'd go with 1% if that's what I had to do to bring people with me. But I'd prefer closer to 0%. I also think this could work politically. I mean, lots of economists disagree with me on this, but I think if you just told the public, every other political party has a policy to make all of your goods and services cost 3% more every year. I have a policy for it to cost no more every year. I want to stop prices going up. I think a smart politician could make hay out of that. But they would have to first win the economic argument to make sure that they weren't embarrassed on live TV, which I think we can do. All right. I think that's just about the end. Helium is needed to make your MRI machines work. That's good information. Yeah, I agree. Big fan of the whiskey. It's not great for my bank balance, though. So, Ardub, I need you to go to taxpayers.org.au and either make a nice big fat donation about the size of a bottle of whiskey or sign up to be a member. So that'll help me to be able to afford the whiskey because it's going up in price, I'll tell you what. And yes, very much. We were able to offset high labor prices with low energy costs. You basically have to choose one. If you want high energy prices, well, then you're going to need to import a bunch of cheap workers, which is not great for the existing workers. Or you could, if you have very cheap energy, the logical corollary of that is you're going to end up with higher productivity. And higher productivity means higher wages, right? You don't even need to force it with government legislation. If you have cheap energy, you will just end up with higher wages because you'll have higher labor productivity. All right. I think I'm going to draw the line there, coming up to 2.5 hours, as we normally do at the end of these live streams. Gene, what's your summary? What's your wrap up and takeaways for today?
John, I thought it was a great conversation. I liked having Tom on board, and I think the point he made about Cuba has been the place to look next. That Donald Trump will move on to. I think that's that's potentially a good one, a good point. I mean, there's less. I mean, there's hardly any geo-economic ramifications from that, I imagine. It'll be a lot less anxiety-inducing for the global economy than what they're doing in Iran. I'm not sure about the logic of it or the morality of it, but I mean, clearly, that regime there has been, it's not good for the people of Cuba. So, I mean, it could be a positive, probably would be a positive thing for Cuba, but whether a US invasion is the right policy, I don't know. We'll probably have to chat about that in future live streams.
Yes, I think Cuba opens up a whole new can of worms, which I am going to sidestep at this late stage. Something that I didn't mention at the beginning is probably the wrong time to mention it now, but just in case you haven't noticed yet, we have changed the time for this podcast. Now that daylight savings is over, the plan is 8 p.m. Eastern. So now it's the same time in Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. We do this every week on Thursdays now at 8 p.m. Gene and myself and a regular rotation of guests most of the time. We have some good guests lined up for the coming weeks. I won't tell you who now because I don't want to get the wrong guest in the wrong order and have to fix it later. But we've got just some names that'll be coming up soon, hopefully. Adam Crichton, Jared Rennick, Matt Canavan. All of these people are interesting to have on board and always have interesting things to say. So look out for those in the coming weeks. We do this every week. This is put together by the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, taxpayers.org.au. Please go there, check us out, check what we're doing, and please check out our Substack, Oz Taxpayers, AUS taxpayers.substack.com. Please sign up to get those newsletters. We only send you one a week, so you don't get email fatigue. If you are able to, please consider signing up as a financial member. Now, we put out nearly everything in front of the paywall so that you can see nearly everything we do without signing up, which is not a good sales pitch to get you to sign up, but we do need to pay our bills to keep going here. So if you want to help us keep going with what we're doing, please do consider signing up. There are some very cheap options, a couple of dollars a month. If you have a bit more money, please consider signing up to a more expensive option. It helps us to do what we're doing, and we really do appreciate it. Until next time, Gene, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us. And until next week, stay happy and stay free.